After my grandfather's will was read my children, and I rushed to an exclusive Atlanta restaurant to surprise my husband with a custom cake and news of a $91 million miracle. Instead, I walked into a private dining room to find him feeding caviar to his 24-year-old assistant, while my mother-in-law and sister-in-law cheered them on. When he threw divorce papers at me and laughed, ordering me to pay their $4,500 dinner bill, he thought he had completely destroyed me. He had no idea the black card I dropped on the table was about to turn his entire empire into ashes. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button if you love seeing arrogant men get exactly what they deserve. I stood outside the heavy mahogany doors of the VIP room at Le Petit Chateau, holding a vanilla buttercream cake in my trembling hands. My 14-year-old son Jamal was shifting excitedly from foot to foot, while my 12-year-old daughter Kira held a silver balloon that read, "Congratulations." We were vibrating with pure joy. Just 2 hours earlier, I had been sitting in a sterile law office in downtown Atlanta, listening to an attorney explain that my estranged grandfather Elijah had left me an inheritance of $91.6 million from his Texas oil and real estate ventures. It was generational wealth. It was the kind of money that could change our lives forever. I had spent the last 10 years sacrificing my freelance copywriting career to be a stay-at-home mother, raising our children and supporting my husband Kendrick while he climbed the corporate ladder to become an investment banking director. We had struggled in the early years, but I always believed we were building a foundation together. I wanted Kendrick to be the first person to know that all our sacrifices had finally paid off. I took a deep breath, balancing the heavy cake box on one arm, and pushed open the door. The words of celebration died in my throat before they could even form. The private dining room was bathed in the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, but the scene before me felt like plunging into freezing water. Kendrick was not at the head of the table reviewing portfolios or entertaining clients like he told me he would be. He was sitting intimately close to his 24-year-old assistant Jasmine. His hand was resting comfortably on her bare thigh. As I opened the door, I watched my husband laughing softly while he used a silver spoon to feed her a delicate portion of caviar. But what made my stomach physically violently drop was not just the infidelity. It was the audience. Sitting across from them, sipping vintage champagne and smiling warmly at the illicit couple, was my mother-in-law Brenda. Next to her sat Kendrick's brother Terrence and his white wife Brittany. They were all in on it. My entire family by marriage was sharing an expensive dinner celebrating my husband's affair, while I was at home washing his laundry and packing his children's school lunches. Jamal dropped the gift bag he was holding. The soft thud echoed loudly in the sudden silence of the room. Kendrick froze, but only for a fraction of a second. He did not jump up. He did not push Jasmine away. He did not look ashamed or guilty. He simply wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and let out a long, irritated sigh, as if we had interrupted a crucial business meeting. "What are you doing here, Naomi?" he asked, his voice dripping with annoyance. "I told you I was hosting a private networking dinner." I stepped fully into the room, my hands gripping the cake box so tightly the cardboard began to crumple. "You call feeding your assistant caviar a networking dinner?" I asked, my voice remarkably steady, despite the hurricane of betrayal tearing through my chest. "In front of our children, Kendrick." Jasmine did not even have the decency to look embarrassed. She adjusted her designer dress, smoothed her hair, and leaned closer to my husband, smirking at me. Brenda rolled her eyes and set her champagne flute down with a sharp clink. "Do not be dramatic, Naomi," Brenda said, brushing off my pain as if I were a complaining toddler. "Kendrick works incredibly hard to provide for you and those children. He deserves to unwind with people who understand his world. You always have to make everything a spectacle." I stared at the woman who had demanded I call her mom for the last 10 years. She had always viewed me as a peasant, a working-class girl who had somehow tricked her brilliant son into marriage. But sitting there blessing his affair was a new level of depravity. Kendrick stood up slowly, buttoning his tailored suit jacket. He walked over to his leather briefcase resting on a side chair, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and tossed it onto the center of the dining table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right next to Jasmine's empty plate. "Sign the divorce papers, Naomi," he said, his tone entirely devoid of emotion. I was going to have my lawyer serve you on Monday, but since you decided to crash my evening, we might as well handle this now. Jamal stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. You cannot do this to Mom, he yelled, his voice cracking with adolescent outrage. You are cheating on her. Watch your tone with me, boy, Kendrick snapped, pointing a threatening finger at our son. I am the reason you have a roof over your head. I am the reason you attend a private academy. I am the man of this house. Then he turned his cold, dark eyes back to me. Let us be brutally honest, Naomi. You are a washed-up copywriter who smells like laundry detergent and cheap lotion. I am an investment director. I represent Black excellence. I need a partner who elevates my brand, who can walk into a gala and command the room. You have spent the last 10 years dragging me down. Jasmine giggled softly, picking up her glass. It is true, Naomi, she chimed in. Kendrick needs an equal. I have a master's degree in finance. We speak the same language. You should really just let him go so he can reach his full potential. The audacity of this young woman sitting there evaluating my worth based on a degree while sleeping with a married man was staggering. I looked at Terrence, expecting him to say something to defend the mother of his niece and nephew, but Terrence just looked down at his phone, cowardly, avoiding my gaze. That was when Brittany decided to speak up. My white sister-in-law had always made it her personal mission to remind me of my place. She married into the family a few years after I did, and immediately bonded with Brenda over their shared love of luxury brands and country clubs. Brittany leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs and eyeing me with pure, unadulterated disdain. Honestly, Naomi, you should be grateful. He kept you around this long. Brittany scoffed, her tone laced with that familiar, patronizing superiority. You people always expect a free ride. You managed to secure a wealthy man, and then you just stopped trying. You stopped working. You stopped improving yourself. Kendrick is carrying the entire financial burden while you sit at home doing nothing. It is exhausting to watch. Go back to your little neighborhood and let Kendrick breathe. You people. The racial and class microaggressions were not even hidden anymore. Brittany had spent years making snide comments about my natural hair, my inexpensive clothes, and my working-class upbringing. She desperately wanted to be the superior woman in this wealthy Black family, and putting me down was her favorite way to assert dominance. I work every single day taking care of this family, I replied, staring directly into Brittany's cold blue eyes. I sacrificed my career so Kendrick could build his. Do not ever speak to me about working hard when you spend your days spending my brother-in-law's money at the spa. Brittany's face flushed bright red, but before she could retaliate, Kendrick slammed his hand on the table. Enough, he barked. I am not listening to you embarrass yourself any further. You will sign those papers, Naomi. The prenuptial agreement you signed 8 years ago ensures you walk away with exactly what you brought into this marriage, which is absolutely nothing. I have already contacted the bank. I froze all of your joint credit cards an hour ago. You do not have access to a single dime of my money. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room. Kira began to cry quietly, hiding her face against my arm. My husband of 10 years, the man I had loved and supported through his lowest moments, had planned this execution perfectly. He had canceled my cards, brought his family to celebrate his new relationship, and intended to leave the mother of his children destitute. Right on cue. The heavy oak doors opened, and a waiter in a crisp white uniform walked in, carrying a leather checkbook on a silver tray. He looked around the tense room, clearly uncomfortable, and hesitated. Bring that here, Kendrick commanded. The waiter hurried over and handed Kendrick the leather folder. Kendrick opened it, glanced at the total, and smiled a cruel, wicked smile. He pulled the receipt from the folder and held it out toward the waiter, pointing directly at me. Actually, give this to my ex-wife, Kendrick instructed, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet room. She will be handling the bill tonight. Consider it a parting gift. The waiter looked terrified. He slowly walked over to me, holding out the tray. I glanced down at the paper. $4,572. They had ordered the most expensive Wagyu steaks, imported truffles, and multiple bottles of vintage champagne to celebrate the destruction of my family. Brenda let out a sharp, mean laugh. Oh, Kendrick, do not tease the poor girl, Brenda sneered. You know she does not have $4,000 to her name. She probably does not even have $40. Let her go home and pack her cheap bags. We will handle the bill. I stood there feeling the weight of the cake box in my hands. Inside was a beautiful red velvet cake, the words Happy Wealth Day, written in gold icing. I had planned to share my joy to elevate our entire family. I had planned to pay off Kendrick's lingering business debts, to buy Brenda the vacation home she always wanted to secure our children's future. Instead, I was staring at a table full of parasites who thought they had finally crushed me. I slowly set the cake box down on a side table. I placed a comforting hand on Kira's shoulder and looked at Jamal, giving him a reassuring nod. Then I reached into my simple, inexpensive handbag. I bypassed my frozen joint debit cards. I bypassed the meager cash I carried for emergencies. My fingers found the cool, sleek metal of the brand new card the estate lawyers had handed me just hours prior. I pulled out the heavy, solid black Centurion card. It caught the light of the chandelier gleaming with silent, undeniable power. It was an invitation-only card backed by the $91 million trust fund that was now legally solely mine. I dropped the black card onto the waiter's silver tray. The heavy metal made a sharp, satisfying clack against the silver. "Charge it to this," I told the waiter, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "And please add a generous 20% tip for your trouble." The entire room stopped breathing. The smug smile slid completely off Kendrick's face. His eyes locked onto the black metal card, recognizing instantly what it was and what it represented. He was an investment banker. He knew you could not even hold that specific card unless you had tens of millions in liquid assets. Jasmine frowned, leaning over to look at the tray. "What is that?" she whispered. Brenda and Brittany stared in absolute shock. Terrence finally looked up from his phone, his mouth hanging open. Kendrick took a step forward, his voice suddenly tight with confusion and rising panic. "Naomi, where did you get that card? Whose card is that?" I looked at the man who had just thrown me away like garbage. I looked at the family who had cheered for my downfall. I did not cry. I did not scream. I simply smiled, a cold, brilliant smile that made Kendrick physically recoil. "It belongs to a woman who no longer needs to tolerate your disrespect," I said smoothly. I picked up the manila envelope containing the divorce papers, holding it up for everyone to see. "I will be happy to sign these, Kendrick. In fact, I have never been more excited to sign a document in my entire life. Enjoy the rest of your networking dinner." I turned around, taking Jamal and Kira by their hands. As the waiter scurried away to process the transaction, I walked out of the private room, leaving the door wide open. Behind me, I could hear the immediate eruption of chaotic voices. Kendrick shouting my name, Brenda demanding answers, and Brittany asking what was going on. But I did not look back. I walked through the elegant restaurant with my head held high, my children by my side, and a $91 million secret protecting my future. The war had just begun, and they had absolutely no idea who they were fighting. The drive back home was tense and completely silent. My hands gripped the steering wheel of my old sedan so tightly that my knuckles turned white, while Jamal and Kira sat in the back seat. The streetlights of Atlanta blurred past the windows as we sped through the upscale neighborhoods, heading toward the place I used to call home. Kira was crying softly, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. Jamal was staring out the window, his jaw clenched tight with adolescent anger. I wanted to comfort them, to tell them everything was going to be fine, but I needed to stay focused. I had a $91 million inheritance waiting to be finalized and a legal strategy to execute. Right now, my only priority was getting into the house, packing our essentials, and getting my children to a safe location before Kendrick arrived. We finally reached the familiar towering iron gates of our Buckhead mansion. I reached up and pressed the button on the visor remote, expecting the heavy metal gates to swing open smoothly, just as they had every single day for the past decade. Nothing happened. I frowned and pressed the button again, holding it down for a few seconds. Still nothing. I rolled down my window and leaned out into the humid night air to punch my personal access code into the illuminated keypad. The small screen flashed a bright red light, and a harsh buzzing sound rejected my entry. I typed the numbers again, moving slower this time, making sure I hit every single digit correctly. The screen flashed red again, followed by the same harsh buzzing sound. A cold realization washed over my body. Kendrick had not just frozen my joint credit cards at the restaurant. In the short time since we had walked out, he had already accessed the home security system application on his phone and revoked my gate privileges. He was treating the mother of his children like a dangerous intruder, attempting to break into his property. "Mom, what is going on?" Jamal asked, leaning forward. "Why will the gate not open for us?" Before I could formulate an answer, a sudden movement caught my eye. The main house sat elevated on a slight hill, and from my spot in the driveway, I had a clear, unobstructed view of the second-floor master bedroom balcony. The glass French doors were thrown wide open. Stepping out onto the marble terrace was Brenda, my cruel mother-in-law. She was still wearing the expensive silk evening gown she had worn to the restaurant, having clearly rushed back to the house to carry out the next phase of their coordinated family attack. In her hands, she held a massive, heavy black trash bag. She dragged the bulging plastic across the stone floor to the edge of the wrought iron railing, and with a loud grunt of effort, she heaved it over the side. The bag plummeted 2 stories down, hitting the pristine brick driveway with a sickening thud. The thin plastic split open upon impact, spilling my modest clothes all over the ground. My faded jeans, my simple cotton blouses, and my comfortable sweaters scattered across the driveway like discarded rubbish. "My son bought this mansion with his hard-earned money," Brenda screamed from the balcony, her voice carrying over the quiet, manicured lawns of the wealthy neighborhood. "You do not get to take a single thing, you parasite. Everything inside this house belongs to Kendrick. You leave with exactly what you came with, which is absolutely nothing." I put the car in park and stepped out into the night air. Kira whimpered from the back seat, begging me not to go outside, but I needed to gather what I could for the kids. Brenda disappeared back into the bedroom and emerged seconds later with another heavy black bag, tossing it over the railing with vicious delight. It hit the hood of my car before bouncing to the pavement, spilling a pair of my worn sneakers and a few paperback books. "Get back to the gutter where you belong!" Brenda yelled, leaning over the railing with a triumphant smirk on her face. "You thought you were so smart walking out of the restaurant, but you are just a pathetic broke woman with nowhere to go. My son is finally free of your dead weight." I knelt on the rough brick driveway, quietly gathering my scattered clothing and stuffing the items back into the torn plastic bags. I refused to let Brenda see me cry. I refused to give her the satisfaction of watching me break down. As I reached for a fallen sweater, bright headlights suddenly flooded the driveway, blinding me temporarily. The loud roar of a high-performance engine filled the air as Kendrick pulled up in his silver Maserati, stopping right behind my sedan and blocking me in. Kendrick stepped out of the sports car, slamming the door with unnecessary force. He had left Jasmine behind, clearly eager to come handle me himself. He strutted up the driveway, his tailored suit jacket pushed back with his hands resting arrogantly on his hips. He looked down at me kneeling on the pavement, surrounded by garbage bags, and let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Look at you," Kendrick sneered, shaking his head in feigned pity. "I told you that you were nothing without me. You try to pull a stunt at dinner acting like you have power, but here you are picking up your cheap rags off the floor like the trash you truly are. Leave her alone." The sudden angry shout surprised us both. I turned around to see Jamal stepping out of my car. My 14-year-old son marched up the driveway, his chest puffed out, placing himself directly between me and his father. "You do not get to treat my mom like this," Jamal said, his voice trembling, but fiercely determined. "You are the one who messed up everything. You are the one cheating on her." Kendrick narrowed his eyes and his face twisted with sudden explosive rage. "Do not you dare talk back to me, boy," Kendrick barked, stepping forward. He lunged and shoved Jamal hard in the chest. The forceful push sent my son stumbling backward, and Jamal fell hard onto the brick driveway, scraping his palms against the rough stone. A feral scream tore from my throat. I dropped the clothes and rushed to my son, pulling him up and checking his hands for blood. "Kendrick, you do not ever touch him," I yelled, stepping in front of Jamal with my arms wide open to protect him. "I pay the bills, I make the rules," Kendrick shouted back, pointing a finger inches from my face. "That boy needs to learn respect, and you are setting a terrible example for him. In fact, you need to get off my property right now before I call the police. You are trespassing. You have no legal right to be here. I am calling the cops to have you arrested tonight." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, holding it up like a weapon. Do not test me, Naomi, Kendrick threatened, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I will have you thrown in a jail cell tonight. And do not even think about trying to take my children with you. I will file for full legal custody first thing in the morning. No judge in the country is going to give 2 kids to a homeless, unemployed, unstable woman living out of her car. You cannot provide for them. You cannot even provide for yourself. I took a step closer, towering over me, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me into submission. You really thought you were doing something clever walking out of the restaurant? He taunted, his voice dripping with condescension. But you forgot how the real world works. You forgot about the contract you signed. I was talking about the prenuptial agreement. 8 years ago, when my freelance copywriting business completely collapsed due to the recession, I had been terrified and vulnerable. Kendrick had swooped in, playing the role of the savior, but his financial help came with a brutal condition. He forced me to sign a draconian prenup that explicitly stated I would receive 0 spousal support and 0 marital assets if we ever divorced. He convinced me it was just a standard formality to protect his business interests, but it was always a calculated tool for financial abuse. For 8 long years, he used that contract to control my every move, reminding me constantly that I would be left completely destitute if I ever dared to step out of line or leave him. You signed away every single right you had, Kendrick reminded me, smiling maliciously as he watched my face for a reaction. You agreed that my money is my money. You have 0 income. Your credit score is tied to my accounts, which are now frozen. You literally cannot even afford to rent a cheap motel room tonight. You have absolutely nothing. You are nothing. So go ahead and take your garbage bags and drive away in your old car. Let the kids stay here where they belong. Because if you take them with you, I promise I will destroy you in family court. I looked at the man I had devoted my entire adult life to. I looked at his mother still standing on the balcony, watching us with a satisfied grin. They truly believed they had backed me into a corner from which I could never escape. They thought poverty was my only option. They thought fear would force me to surrender my children. Instead of pleading or arguing, I calmly pulled out my phone. I opened my messages and selected Roxanne, my brilliant and ruthless attorney. I quickly typed a short message. Execute Plan B. Let him think I am sleeping in a shelter. I hit send and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Kendrick saw me texting and laughed out loud. Who are you texting, Naomi? A homeless shelter? Are you begging one of your broke relatives to let you crash on their couch tonight? I am dialing 911 right now. I want you off my driveway in exactly 2 minutes. Before his thumb could even press the call button, a pair of blinding white headlights swept across the dark street. The deep rumbling purr of a massive engine echoed through the quiet neighborhood. A sleek, completely blacked-out, custom-tinted Cadillac Escalade rolled smoothly up to the curb, stopping right in front of my old sedan. The vehicle was massive, intimidating, and reeked of elite corporate wealth. Kendrick stopped dialing. He frowned, staring at the luxury SUV, wondering which of his wealthy neighbors had pulled up to his house. The driver's side door opened, and a man in an immaculate black suit and chauffeur cap stepped out. He walked around the front of the vehicle with crisp, professional strides, ignoring Kendrick completely. The chauffeur approached me, offering a polite, respectful bow before opening the heavy rear passenger door of the Escalade. Your car is ready, Mom, the chauffeur said smoothly. I grabbed the 2 torn trash bags, handed one to Jamal, and took Kira by the hand. Get in the car, kids, I said softly. We are going somewhere safe tonight. Kendrick stood frozen, his phone hovering near his ear, his mouth slightly open in utter confusion. He watched helplessly as my children and I climbed into the pristine leather interior of the luxury vehicle. The chauffeur closed the door behind us, walked around to the driver's seat, and started the engine. As the Escalade pulled away from the curb, speeding off into the night, I looked through the tinted glass and watched my husband standing alone in the driveway, completely baffled by the power he had just truly witnessed. The plush leather interior of the customized luxury vehicle provided the first moment of genuine physical safety and emotional relief I had felt since walking into that disastrous restaurant. I held Kira and Jamal close to my sides as we glided smoothly through the dark, humid Atlanta streets, leaving Kendrick and his staggering arrogance far behind us in the brick driveway. The highly professional chauffeur navigated the quiet, upscale neighborhoods, taking us directly to a five-star luxury penthouse suite located in the heart of downtown Atlanta. Roxanne, my incredibly proactive and brilliant attorney, had already secured this lavish accommodation under a discreet corporate alias to ensure Kendrick could not track our physical movements. As we rode up the private glass elevator overlooking the glowing city skyline, my children looked around the opulent space in quiet awe. Their previous fear began to melt away, replaced by a sense of wonder. I ordered them an extravagant room service dinner of steak and gourmet desserts, and I tucked them into pristine high thread count silk sheets. I kissed their foreheads, promising them softly but fiercely that no matter what happened, their father would never be able to hurt us, manipulate us, or make us feel small ever again. But I knew Kendrick deeply and intimately. I knew his severely bruised ego would demand immediate and brutal retaliation. He was a man who could not stand losing control, and he certainly could not stand a woman he deemed socially and financially beneath him walking away on her own empowered terms. The very next morning, my maternal and survival instincts proved absolutely correct. Kendrick wasted absolutely no time leveraging his powerful corporate connections and his notoriously aggressive, expensive legal team. By 9 o'clock in the morning, his high-paid lawyers had marched straight into the county courthouse to file an emergency ex parte motion demanding full and temporary custody of our children. He built his entire vicious legal strategy on the completely false and fabricated premise that I was destitute, a sudden, unpredictable flight risk, and experiencing a severe psychological mental breakdown. He genuinely believed that stripping me of my joint credit cards meant I was sleeping on a dangerous park bench or begging for a bed at a local homeless shelter. He thought his financial abuse had successfully paralyzed me. But Kendrick was not the only one making aggressive, coordinated moves against me that morning. He had sent his most loyal and eager attack dog to do his dirty work on the ground level. Brittany, my white sister-in-law, had eagerly and enthusiastically volunteered to handle the physical retrieval of my children from their school. She drove her pristine white Range Rover straight to Oak Ridge Preparatory Academy, the elite, prestigious $40,000 a year private institution where Jamal and Kira attended classes. Brittany had always deeply and bitterly resented that my children attended a much more prestigious and expensive academy than her own kids. She viewed her sudden mission as the absolute perfect opportunity to publicly humiliate me, assert her racial and class dominance, and prove her loyalty to Brenda and the wealthy side of the family. She marched right into the main administrative office with her designer handbag swinging on her arm, demanding loudly to speak with the head principal immediately. She wanted to create a spectacle and show everyone that she was the savior, stepping in to rescue the poor, unfortunate children of a broken, ruined woman. However, I had fully anticipated exactly this kind of aggressive, calculating maneuver. Roxanne had warned me late last night that narcissistic abusers and their enablers always target the children first, in order to force swift compliance and emotional surrender. Therefore, I had arrived at the elite school 30 minutes before Brittany even pulled into the parking lot. I stepped out of my chauffeured vehicle wearing a flawlessly tailored designer power suit that radiated quiet, untouchable generational wealth. I was sitting comfortably in the principal's spacious mahogany-paneled office, sipping warm herbal tea when Brittany finally burst through the heavy double doors. Brittany froze completely in her tracks, her eyes darting wildly from my polished, pristine appearance to the calm, composed expression on the principal's face. She quickly recovered her composure, pasting on a fake, deeply condescending smile that did not reach her cold eyes. "Naomi, what an absolute surprise to see you sitting here," Brittany said, her voice dripping with venomous faux pity and dripping with toxic microaggressions. "I am here on behalf of Kendrick to enroll the children and take them back to his house where they truly belong and where they can be properly cared for." The principal looked between us, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating family drama unfolding in his quiet academic sanctuary. Brittany leaned heavily over the polished wooden desk, purposefully invading the principal's personal space to use her societal privilege as a weapon. "You need to understand the dire reality of the situation here," Brittany told the principal, deliberately lowering her voice into a conspiratorial, mocking whisper, Her husband cut her off completely last night. She is essentially a squatter now with absolutely no income, no savings, and no safe place to live. It is a very sad and tragic situation, but we, as her wealthy extended family, are taking over the tuition payments and assuming full legal and physical responsibility for the children moving forward. We simply cannot have them exposed to her financial ruin and instability. It would be terrible for the school's reputation as well. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her lies made my blood boil hot and fast, but I kept my facial expression completely serene and unbothered. I placed my delicate porcelain teacup down on the matching saucer with a soft, deliberate click that immediately drew both of their attention back to me. I looked at Brittany, absorbing her desperate need to feel superior to me, her desperate need to put the black working-class girl back in her place. I am afraid you are severely misinformed and drastically overstepping your boundaries, Brittany, I said, my voice echoing with smooth, unwavering, and absolute authority. You cannot unenroll my children or take them anywhere today or any other day, because you have absolutely no legal standing, and more importantly, you have absolutely no financial leverage in this institution. Brittany let out a short, harsh, barking laugh of pure disbelief, crossing her arms over her chest. No financial leverage, she scoffed loudly, her voice echoing in the large office. Naomi, please do not embarrass yourself further. You are wearing a rented suit you probably got this morning. You do not even have a checking account of your own. Kendrick pays for everything, including the very air you breathe and the food your children eat. You are completely broke. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into my structured designer leather briefcase and slowly pulled out a crisp, officially stamped banking document. I slid the physical bank receipt smoothly across the principal's polished desk, pushing it right under Brittany's glaring, judgmental eyes. Actually, I said, leaning back comfortably in my leather chair and crossing my legs, the tuition for both Jamal and Kira has already been paid in full. Not just for this current academic year, but fully prepaid all the way through their high school graduation. That is a total of $320,000. Here is the certified wire transfer confirmation straight from my personal independent accounts, which processed successfully at exactly 8 o'clock this morning. The principal adjusted his glasses, inspecting the official bank document carefully. He nodded respectfully, confirming the astronomical payment and validating my absolute authority over my children's enrollment. Brittany leaned over to look closely at the paper. All the color instantly and violently drained from her face, leaving her looking chalk white and physically ill. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared blindly at the bold printed numbers, confirming a level of immense liquid wealth she could not even comprehend, let alone match with her own husband's money. The racist microaggressions, the bitter condescension, the hateful assumptions about my poverty, all shattered instantly against the undeniable concrete reality of that single piece of paper. She looked like she was going to faint right there on the expensive office rug. If you ever attempt to approach my children or interfere with their education again, I will have the campus security arrest you for attempted kidnapping, I told Brittany, my tone dangerously low and promising absolute total destruction. Now get out of my sight before I decide to make an example out of you. Utterly humiliated, entirely defeated, and visibly shaking, Brittany grabbed her expensive purse and stormed out of the office without looking back or saying another word. She had come to the school hoping to strip me of my dignity, and instead she had been completely and publicly crushed by my overwhelming financial power. I thanked the principal for his time, gathered my things, and walked out to my waiting vehicle, feeling a deep, satisfying warmth spreading through my chest. Later that same afternoon, I met my brilliant lawyer Roxanne in her high-rise corner office, overlooking the sprawling, magnificent Atlanta skyline. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, beautiful golden shadows across the expensive modern furniture and the abstract art on her walls. Roxanne was waiting for me with 2 tall glasses of sparkling water and a thick, heavy manila folder resting ominously on the glass coffee table between us. She looked impeccably sharp in her crimson-tailored suit, a woman who clearly dominated every courtroom she entered. "You handled the school situation perfectly today," Roxanne said, her dark eyes gleaming with sharp, predatory approval as I sat down across from her. You were absolutely right to let Kendrick and his toxic family continue to feel arrogant and financially superior to you. Their overconfidence is making them incredibly sloppy, reckless, and entirely predictable. I took a slow sip of the cold, sparkling water, letting the events of the day settle in my mind. What did your private investigators find? I asked, feeling the adrenaline pumping through my veins. Roxanne smiled fiercely, showing perfectly white teeth, and she slid the thick, heavy file across the glass table toward me. She tapped her manicured fingernail against the cover with dramatic flair. My forensic accounting team has been working around the clock, tracking every single penny. Kendrick has moved over the past 3 years, Roxanne explained, her voice vibrating with intense professional satisfaction. Your husband thought he was an untouchable financial genius, but he left a massive, undeniable digital trail. He has been systematically and illegally siphoning marital funds right under your nose. He hid $2 million in a secret offshore bank account located in the Cayman Islands. I opened the file, staring at the undeniable concrete proof of his deep, extensive financial betrayal. Page after page showed money being moved from our joint savings hidden in dummy corporate accounts and then wired overseas. He had been planning to leave me with absolutely nothing while selfishly hoarding millions of dollars for his own future. And the absolute best part, Roxanne continued, leaning forward with a dangerous, lethal smirk, is that he put the offshore account entirely under Jasmine's name to avoid tax detection and evade divorce discovery. He is hiding your marital wealth using his 24-year-old mistress as a human shield. He thinks he is a mastermind, but he is just a common, arrogant criminal. I looked up from the heavily documented bank statements, meeting Roxanne's fierce, intense gaze. A cold, calculating calm washed over my entire physical being, replacing any lingering heartbreak with pure, absolute determination. Kendrick had tried to destroy me, throw me out into the street, and take my beautiful children away from me, using the very money he had stolen from our marriage. I thought he held all the winning cards, but he was completely oblivious and blind to the $91.6 million empire standing right in front of him. It is time, Roxanne said, her voice dropping to a low, thrilling whisper that echoed in the quiet office. It is time to set the ultimate legal trap. We are going to use his greed against him. We are going to let his own massive, fragile ego destroy him completely. The heavy oak doors of the corner office closed with a soft thud, sealing us away from the busy Atlanta evening outside. Roxanne walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city skyline and crossed her arms. She looked impeccable in her tailored crimson suit, projecting an aura of absolute legal dominance. I sat on the plush leather sofa, feeling the cool glass of my sparkling water against my palm. We had just uncovered the ultimate proof of Kendrick siphoning $2 million into an offshore account under his young assistant Jasmine and her fake corporate name. Roxanne turned away from the window and walked back to the glass coffee table. She leaned forward, resting her manicured hands on the thick manila folder containing my husband and his financial crimes. You were right to let him feel arrogant today, Naomi, she said, her voice steady and calculating. The most dangerous weapon we can hand a narcissistic man is his own unchecked confidence. Kendrick genuinely believes he has backed you into a corner of absolute poverty. I think his aggressive tactics at the private school this morning proved that he holds all the ultimate, unyielding, dominant, absolute power. I took a slow sip of my water, letting the sharp carbonation ground my racing thoughts. He is completely blinded by his own superiority complex, I replied, keeping my voice low and steady. He looks at me and only sees a dependent housewife who failed to maintain a freelance copywriting career 8 years ago. He does not see me as a threat because his ego physically will not allow him to believe a woman could ever outsmart him. He constantly talks about representing Black excellence, but he measures his entire self-worth by degrading the innocent people completely around him. Roxanne smiled, a fierce, predatory smile that made me incredibly glad she was fighting on my side. That is exactly the psychological blind spot we are going to exploit, she explained, walking behind her massive mahogany desk. Modern divorce law is a complicated battlefield, especially when there are significant assets involved. If Kendrick finds out about your grandfather Elijah and the $91.6 million inheritance sitting in your name, he will immediately shift his entire strategy. He will hire an army of ruthless corporate lawyers to completely invalidate the prenup and demand half of your huge money. He would claim that your inheritance is marital property. I continued feeling a cold wave of realization wash over me. He would drag the divorce out for years, freezing my assets and using the children as leverage to force me into a massive financial settlement. Roxanne nodded firmly, pointing a pen in my direction. Exactly, Naomi. Men like Kendrick do not walk away from money. If he knows you are a multimillionaire, he will suddenly claim he was a supportive husband who deserves a massive payout. We cannot let him discover the true hidden truth until it is too late. So how do we stop him? I asked, setting my glass down on a sleek coaster. How do we protect the trust fund before he gets a chance to stake a claim? Roxanne sat down in her high-back leather chair and opened a fresh legal pad. We make him voluntarily surrender his rights to your assets, she said smoothly. We have to make him sign a legally binding document waiving all future claims to your independent wealth. And we have to make him think that signing it is entirely his own brilliant, amazing idea to protect his hidden funds. Before I could ask how we would possibly orchestrate such a massive deception, my phone began to vibrate violently against the glass table. The screen lit up with a rapid succession of text messages. I picked up the device and saw Kendrick sending a barrage of cruel, aggressive messages. I read the words silently, feeling the familiar sting of his verbal abuse, but this time it was mixed with a deep, underlying sense of control. I was threatening to completely destroy my personal reputation among the wealthy elite social circles in Atlanta if I did not surrender my life immediately. He says I am a pathetic excuse for a mother, I told Roxanne, reading the glowing screen. He says he is going to drag my name through the mud and tell all of our friends that I suffered a complete mental breakdown. He is demanding that I sign the original prenuptial enforcement documents by this Friday. If I do not comply, he promises to take Jamal and Kira away from me permanently and leave me rotting in the streets. He says he has already told his cruel mother Brenda to prepare the guest rooms for the scared small young children. Roxanne did not look worried at all. In fact, her dark eyes gleamed with pure strategic satisfaction. Let him vent his toxic anger, she advised, leaning back in her chair. Every single threatening message he sends is just another piece of evidence proving his hostile intent. His impatience is his greatest weakness, Naomi. He wants to secure his $2 million offshore fund and marry Jasmine as quickly as possible. He is desperate to cleanly sever financial ties with you before his own corporate embezzlement catches up with him. We are going to use that desperate rush right against him. I locked my phone, shutting off the stream of endless digital harassment. I thanked Roxanne for her brilliant guidance and took the private elevator down to the underground parking garage. The chauffeured luxury vehicle was waiting to take me back to the 5-star downtown penthouse suite where my children were safely hidden. The ride through the busy city streets gave me time to process the massive legal trap we were setting. I was preparing to play the most dangerous game of psychological chess of my entire life, and the stakes were nothing less than my whole family's future freedom. When I arrived at the lavish hotel suite, the heavy double doors opened to reveal Jamal and Kira sitting at the sprawling dining table. They were finishing a gourmet room service dinner, but the atmosphere was thick with heavy, unspoken anxiety. Jamal pushed his plate away, his youthful face clouded with deep confusion and hurt. He looked up at me with tired eyes, seeking answers I had tried so hard to shield him from. "Mom, why is Dad acting like a mean monster?" Jamal asked, his voice cracking with the heavy emotional weight of the past 24 long hours. I walked over and sat down closely beside my son, wrapping my arm around his trembling shoulders. Kira left her chair and climbed into my lap, seeking physical comfort and reassurance. I took a deep breath, carefully measuring my words. I needed to explain the harsh reality of their father and his behavior without completely destroying their fundamental trust in the world. "Jamal, some people are deeply broken inside," I explained softly, brushing a hand over his hair. "They feel so small and inadequate that the only way they can feel tall is by verbally hurting their own closest family. Your father cares a great deal about how the world sees him." I continued, keeping my tone completely neutral and devoid of bitter resentment. "He focuses so heavily on projecting wealth and power that he forgot how to be kind. He measures his entire worth by how much control he can exert over the women around him. That is not real strength, Jamal. Real strength is building people up. Real strength is protecting the people you love even when it is difficult. You are a strong young man and you will never be anything at all like your arrogant father. Jamal leaned his head against my shoulder, absorbing the heavy truth of my words. He nodded slowly, processing the profound difference between true leadership and toxic masculine dominance. Kira hugged me tighter, burying her face in my neck. "Are we going to be safe, Mom?" she whispered, her voice muffled against my collarbone. I kissed the top of her head, feeling a fierce maternal protective instinct burning fiercely in my chest. "I promise you both that we are absolutely safe," I whispered back. "Your mother has a plan and nobody will ever make us feel extremely small ever again today." Later that evening, after the kids had finally fallen asleep in the plush luxury beds, I sat alone in the dim ambient lighting of the penthouse living room. I opened my laptop and logged into my secure encrypted email account. A new message from Roxanne was waiting in my inbox, marked with high urgency. I clicked the attached file and opened a dense, complicated legal document titled Amended Settlement Agreement. This was the weapon we were going to use to permanently neutralize Kendrick and his arrogant, greedy family. I read through the carefully crafted pages with intense, steady, unwavering focus. Roxanne had drafted an absolute masterpiece of legal deception and psychological manipulation. On the surface, the document looked like a total unconditional surrender on my part. The first 30 pages outlined how I would walk away from our 10-year marriage with absolutely zero alimony and zero claim to any marital property. The agreement explicitly stated that Kendrick would retain full ownership of the Buckhead mansion, all of the luxury vehicles and his vast investment portfolios. It even contained language protecting his hidden $2 million offshore account, without directly identifying the illegal hidden stolen corporate company banking monetary funds. To a narcissist like Kendrick, this document would read like the ultimate victory lap. It fed perfectly into his delusion that I was a broken, desperate woman, willing to sign anything, just to escape a long, drawn-out legal battle. He would see the $0 alimony figure, and his ego would completely blind him to the rest of the text. But the true genius of Roxanne and her ruthless blueprint was buried deep within the mundane boilerplate legal jargon near the very end of the thick document packet. I scrolled down carefully, scanning the dense, wordy, complicated long paragraphs. There on page 47, hidden beneath tedious clauses about tax liabilities and future dispute resolution, was a single dense paragraph that held the key to my entire future. Both parties irrevocably waive any and all rights, claims, or interests to any current, pending, or future separate assets, inheritances, or trusts held by the other party. It was a mutual waiver disguised as standard legal protection for Kendrick. By signing this document, he would believe he was shielding his hidden $2 million from me, but in reality, he would be permanently signing away his rights to my millions forever. If he signed this amended agreement, he would legally, formally, and irrevocably surrender any chance of touching the $91.6 million fortune my grandfather Elijah had left me. He would voluntarily lock himself out of the greatest financial windfall of our entire lives. The trap was perfectly set, and the bait was irresistible to a man consumed by his own arrogance and greed. Now the only challenge remaining was execution. I had to convince him to actually put his pen to the paper before he discovered my hidden wealth. I closed the laptop very smoothly and quietly. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, staring out at the sprawling, illuminated city of Atlanta, stretching for miles below me. Tomorrow I would have to give the performance of a lifetime. I would have to swallow my pride, put on my oldest faded clothes, and walk into a meeting looking like a completely defeated, shattered woman. I had to let him mock me, degrade me, and feel absolutely victorious. I smiled softly to myself, watching the city lights flicker in the dark. The ultimate revenge requires profound patience, and I was totally ready to finally begin playing. The morning sun crept through the windows of the penthouse suite, but I was already awake, preparing for the most important performance of my life. I stood in front of the mirror, stripping away every trace of the wealthy woman I had become overnight. I needed Kendrick to see only a broken, defeated, desperate housewife who had run out of options. I reached into the torn plastic garbage bag Brenda had viciously thrown from the balcony. I pulled out a faded gray sweater fraying at the sleeves and a pair of old denim jeans that had lost their shape. I pulled my natural hair back into a messy, uneven bun, making sure it looked neglected. I washed my face clean of makeup, ensuring my skin looked tired and pale. I even practiced making my hands tremble slightly watching my reflection to ensure my fake anxiety looked completely authentic. I had to bury my immense pride deep down inside my chest. I had to swallow the burning anger that wanted to scream at the man who betrayed me. Today was not about achieving immediate emotional satisfaction. Today was about securing a $91 million future for my children and laying the final bricks for a trap that would completely decimate my arrogant husband. I kissed Jamal and Kira goodbye, telling them to order whatever they wanted from the hotel room service. I took the elevator down to the basement garage, but I did not take the chauffeured vehicle. Instead, I drove my old beat-up sedan through the morning Atlanta traffic heading far away from the pristine streets of Buckhead. I deliberately chose a location that would feed directly into Kendrick and his massive inflated ego. I drove to the industrial outskirts of the city, where the glass skyscrapers gave way to rundown strip malls and cracked pavement. I pulled into the empty parking lot of a dilapidated local diner that looked like it had not been updated since the late 90s. The neon sign above the entrance was partially burned out, flickering weakly. This was exactly the kind of environment Kendrick actively despised and avoided at all costs. He considered himself the absolute pinnacle of black excellence, and he viewed places like this with pure, unadulterated disgust. By forcing him to meet me here, I was confirming his deeply held belief that I belonged in the gutter while he belonged in the penthouse. I walked inside the diner and the smell of stale coffee and burnt grease immediately filled my lungs. The linoleum floor was sticky under my worn sneakers, and the vinyl booths were cracked and patched with duct tape. I chose a booth in the dark back corner of the restaurant, sliding into the squeaky seat and placing the thick manila folder containing the amended settlement agreement flat on the table. I folded my hands in my lap and I waited patiently for my abusers to arrive. I sat alone in that dingy, forgotten diner for exactly 45 minutes past our scheduled meeting time. The delay was a classic calculated power play. Kendrick wanted me to sit there feeling anxious, insignificant, and completely unworthy of his valuable corporate time. He wanted to remind me that he held all the cards and that I was entirely at his mercy. Finally, the heavy glass door of the diner swung open, bringing a sudden rush of warm, humid street air into the stale room. Kendrick walked in first, wearing a flawless, custom-tailored navy blue suit that probably cost more than the entire diner was worth. He looked around the establishment with open, blatant disgust. His nose literally wrinkled as if the very air inside was deeply offensive to his wealthy lungs. Right behind him, walking with a sickeningly proud strut, was his 24-year-old assistant, Jasmine. She was wearing a skin-tight designer dress and carrying a bright orange Birkin bag that she made sure to display prominently on her arm. When they spotted me sitting in the dark corner booth, they exchanged a smug, knowing smile. They walked over slowly, taking their time, making sure everyone in the cheap diner noticed how expensive and superior they looked. Kendrick slid into the booth across from me, refusing to let his expensive suit jacket touch the sticky vinyl backing. Jasmine slid in right next to him, pressing her body close against his arm. She casually reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, making absolutely certain that the massive blinding diamond ring on her left hand caught the flickering fluorescent light overhead. Kendrick had clearly wasted zero time spending the marital funds he had stolen from me. "Sorry we are late, Naomi," Jasmine said, her voice dripping with venomous fake sympathy and a high-pitched condescending sweetness. "Kendrick was just showing me the blueprints for the massive new custom house he is building for us. We got so caught up looking at the designs for the nursery that we completely lost track of time. It is just so exciting to plan a real future together." She smiled, a cruel, jagged smile, resting her hand directly on Kendrick and his thigh right in front of my face. I forced my eyes to drop down to the sticky table, acting as if her words had physically struck me in the chest. I made my lower lip quiver slightly, channeling all my focus into playing the part of the discarded, shattered wife. Kendrick let out a dark, arrogant chuckle, leaning forward across the table to invade my personal space. His expensive cologne masked the smell of the burnt diner grease. "Look at you," Naomi Kendrick sneered, his voice low and laced with pure toxic contempt. "This is exactly where you belong. Look at this pathetic, dirty little place. This is your true level. You spent the last 10 years playing house pretending you were on my level while I went out every single day and built a massive financial empire from scratch. You got too comfortable living off my hard work, and now reality is finally hitting you in the face." I kept my head down, staring at the cracked laminate tabletop, letting my shoulders slump forward in a posture of total surrender. "You promised we were building a life together, Kendrick," I whispered, making my voice sound hoarse and broken. "I sacrificed my copywriting career to stay home and raise Jamal and Kira so you could focus entirely on your banking promotions. I took care of everything so you could succeed." Kendrick scoffed loudly, waving his hand in the air to dismiss my decade of maternal sacrifice. "Do not give me that tired, lazy excuse, Naomi," he barked. "You stayed home because you failed. Your little freelance business collapsed because you lacked ambition and drive. You used the children as an excuse to sit around our mansion doing absolutely nothing while I carried the entire heavy financial burden of our family on my back alone. I needed a partner who actually brings tangible value to my life." He turned to look at Jasmine, his eyes filled with shallow, narcissistic admiration. "Jasmine has a master's degree in finance," Kendrick boasted, proudly patting her hand. "She understands wealth. She understands corporate strategy. She actively helps me multiply my money and secure my legacy. She actually brings true value to the table every single day. You bring absolutely nothing, Naomi. You are just a massive depreciating asset that I finally decided to cut loose." I listened to his brutal words, feeling a cold, clinical detachment settling over my mind. He was explicitly outlining the deep societal devaluation of stay-at-home mothers. He genuinely believed that because my labor did not generate a direct corporate paycheck, it was completely worthless. He measured human value strictly by academic degrees and offshore bank accounts. He thought he was a giant among men simply because he wore expensive suits and stole money from his own family. He was a small, pathetic creature, and he was about to sign away his entire future. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to tremble as I reached for the manila folder resting on the table. I opened the flap and pulled out the amended settlement agreement that Roxanne had drafted the night before. I slid the legal papers across the sticky table toward him. The document stopped in front of his folded arms. "You win, Kendrick," I said, my voice cracking perfectly on his name. I forced a single tear to spill over my eyelid, tracking a wet path down my pale cheek. "I cannot fight you anymore. I cannot afford a long legal battle against your corporate lawyers. My credit cards are frozen. I have zero money left to my name. I just want this nightmare to be over." Kendrick looked down at the document, his eyes narrowing suspiciously for a brief moment. "What is this, Naomi?" he demanded, his tone sharp and guarded. "It is the new settlement agreement," I whispered, keeping my gaze fixed firmly on my trembling hands. "I had legal aid review your demands this morning. I agreed to everything you wanted. I am signing away all my rights to your money, the offshore accounts, investments, and the Buckhead mansion. I am asking for zero alimony and zero marital property. I am walking away with absolutely nothing." I paused, letting a genuine sob escape my throat before delivering the final desperate plea. "Just please, Kendrick," I begged, looking up into his cold, dark eyes. "Just please do not take my kids away from me. Let me keep Jamal and Kira. That is all I am asking for. Please just let me have my babies." Jasmine leaned over, looking at the front page of the document. Her eyes lit up with greedy excitement as she saw the $0 alimony figure printed clearly. She nudged Kendrick eagerly, practically bouncing in the squeaky booth. "Baby, she is giving up everything," Jasmine whispered loudly, her voice trembling with selfish joy. "We get to keep the entire estate and all the investment portfolios. Let the trash take itself out, baby. You need to sign this right now before she changes her mind and tries to ask for a huge payout." Kendrick stared at my tear-stained face, absorbing my absolute submissive surrender. His massive ego swelled to an enormous size, blinding him to any possibility of deception. He genuinely believed his cruel, aggressive tactics had successfully broken my spirit and crushed my will to fight. He thought he was the ultimate undisputed victor in this divorce. He did not bother to flip to page 47, where the mutual waiver of independent assets was quietly buried in the text. He did not realize that by protecting his hidden $2 million, he was permanently locking himself out of my $91 million inheritance. His eyes gleamed with predatory triumph. I stared at the thick stack of papers resting on the sticky laminate table between us. Kendrick had just dragged his heavy gold fountain pen across the signature line of the amended settlement agreement, but he did not slide the document over to me right away. Instead, he pulled it back toward his chest, flipping through the first few pages one more time, just to revel in his own perceived absolute victory. I watched his dark eyes scan the paragraphs that detailed my complete financial surrender. He stopped at the specific section outlining spousal support, and a harsh, cruel laugh erupted from his chest, echoing loudly in the quiet, empty diner. He actually traced his manicured finger beneath the bold text that explicitly stated, "I would receive $0 in alimony for the rest of my natural life." He looked up at me, his face glowing with an overwhelming sense of deep narcissistic pride. I was so thoroughly consumed by the thrill of leaving me destitute that he completely ignored the fundamental rule of any major corporate financial transaction. He did not call his expensive legal team. He did not scan the document into his phone and send it to his ruthless attorneys for a basic mandatory review. He genuinely believed that his own arrogant intellect was vastly superior to any family court lawyer in the state of Georgia. I thought he had outsmarted the entire legal system simply by bullying a desperate housewife into submission. Jasmine leaned her head against his shoulder, peering down at the pages with a greedy, satisfied smirk on her young face. She let out a soft, mocking sigh and tapped her long acrylic nails against the cracked table. "You really are a genius, baby," Jasmine whispered loud enough for me to hear every single syllable clearly. "You got her to walk away from the Buckhead mansion, the investment portfolios, and all the luxury cars. She is not getting a single dime of our money. You do not even need to pay those overpriced lawyers to look at this garbage. Let the trash take itself out, baby, so we can finally focus on building our new custom estate." Kendrick puffed out his chest, absorbing her shallow flattery like a dry sponge absorbing water. "You are absolutely right, Jasmine," he agreed, his voice dripping with intense, unyielding superiority. "My lawyers would probably charge me $10,000 just to read through this basic surrender document. I am not wasting another penny of my hard-earned wealth on anything involving this pathetic woman." He closed the thick manila folder and shoved it roughly across the dirty table until it hit my folded hands. "It is your turn to sign," Naomi Kendrick commanded, pointing his heavy gold pen directly at my face. "And you better sign it right now before I change my mind and decide to sue you for the legal fees you have already cost me this week." I looked down at the signature line waiting for me at the bottom of the final page. My heart was pounding so violently against my ribcage that I thought they might be able to hear it across the table. I was terrified that my expression would betray the massive, overwhelming tidal wave of pure, triumphant victory swelling inside my soul. I needed to maintain the illusion of a completely shattered, broken woman for just a few more minutes. I slowly reached out and took the gold pen from his outstretched hand, making sure my fingers trembled visibly as our skin briefly brushed together. I let out a soft, ragged breath that sounded exactly like a woman drowning in total, absolute despair. I positioned the pen over the crisp white paper, but I hesitated, letting the heavy silence stretch out to make the performance completely believable. "Look at you," Kendrick sneered, leaning back against the sticky vinyl booth and crossing his arms over his tailored suit jacket. "This is exactly where you belong, Naomi. You spent 10 years playing house while I built a massive corporate empire. You thought you could just ride my coattails forever, without putting in any real actual work. Jasmine has a master's degree in finance. She actually brings tangible, measurable value to my highly successful life. You bring absolutely nothing to the table. You are just a sad, empty shell of a person." His words were designed to completely obliterate my self-esteem, highlighting the cruel societal devaluation of stay-at-home mothers who sacrifice their own personal careers to build a foundation for their ungrateful husbands. He measured human worth strictly by academic prestige and offshore bank accounts. He had absolutely no capacity to understand loyalty sacrifice or quiet unseen labor. I forced a single heavy tear to gather in the corner of my eye. I held my breath until the tear finally spilled over my lower eyelid and tracked a slow, wet path down my pale, unwashed cheek. "You win, Kendrick," I whispered, keeping my voice incredibly small and fragile. "I cannot afford a long, expensive legal battle against you and your corporate lawyers. I am signing away all my rights to your money and the big house. Just please, I beg you, do not take my kids away from me. That is all I ask. Please let me keep Jamal and Kira." Kendrick smiled a cold, dark, predatory smile that chilled the stale air in the dingy restaurant. His eyes gleamed with pure, absolute malicious triumph. "We will see about the kids, Naomi," he replied vaguely, enjoying the profound fear he thought he was inflicting upon me. "Just sign the damn papers." I gripped the gold pen tightly and pressed the metal tip into the signature line. I signed my name with shaky, uneven cursive, completely unlike my usual confident signature. The moment the dark ink connected with the paper, the trap slammed permanently and irrevocably shut. The amended settlement agreement was now a fully executed, legally binding document. By signing his name just moments before me, Kendrick had officially, voluntarily, and permanently locked in the mutual waiver of all current and future independent assets. He had just successfully shielded his hidden $2 million offshore account, but in doing so, he had legally completely surrendered any possible future claim to the $91.6 million fortune waiting for me in the trust fund. He had utterly destroyed his own financial future simply because his massive, fragile ego demanded that he humiliate me in a cheap roadside diner. I slid the signed document back across the table, sliding the gold pen along with it. Kendrick snatched the folder, immediately checking to ensure my signature was in the correct place. He nodded in deep, immense satisfaction and tucked the thick manila envelope safely inside his expensive leather briefcase. He stood up from the squeaky booth, smoothing the front of his flawless navy blue suit jacket. Jasmine slid out behind him, wrapping her arm tightly around his waist and resting her head on his shoulder. She looked down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity and disgust. Kendrick reached into his tailored slacks and pulled out a sleek designer leather wallet. He casually extracted a crumpled $10 bill and tossed it onto the sticky, cracked laminate table right in front of my folded, trembling hands. "Buy yourself a decent hot meal," Naomi, Kendrick said, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet, empty restaurant. "You look absolutely pathetic and starved. Maybe you can find a night shift working the register here to pay for a tiny studio apartment in the slums. Try not to completely ruin the kids while you figure out how to survive in the real, actual world." He did not wait for a response. He turned his back on me completely and walked toward the heavy glass exit door, his leather dress shoes clicking sharply against the dirty linoleum floor. Jasmine followed closely behind him, her hips swaying as she carried her bright orange luxury handbag like a trophy. I stayed perfectly still in the dark corner booth, keeping my head bowed and my shoulders slumped forward in a posture of total, complete, and absolute defeat. I listened carefully to the sound of the heavy glass door swinging open and shutting tight behind them. I heard the distinctive electronic chirp of the luxury sports car unlocking in the empty parking lot outside. I waited, listening to the deep, powerful roar of the expensive Maserati engine turning over and roaring to life. I kept my eyes fixed on the crumpled $10 bill resting on the table until I heard the sound of the tires peeling out of the parking lot, speeding away toward the wealthy, pristine neighborhoods of Buckhead. The exact second the sound of his engine faded away into the humid Atlanta morning, my entire physical demeanor instantly and dramatically changed. The fake trembling in my hands stopped completely. The manufactured tears dried up instantly, leaving my vision sharp, clear, and intensely focused. I slowly rolled my shoulders back, sitting up straight and tall against the worn vinyl booth. The heavy, suffocating weight of playing the broken victim completely evaporated from my chest, replaced by a surging, massive wave of pure electric adrenaline. I reached into my simple, inexpensive handbag and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the camera application and quickly snapped a clear, high-resolution photograph of the space where the document had just been resting, capturing the $10 bill he had so graciously left behind for my survival. I had already taken a crystal-clear hidden photograph of the signature page the exact moment Kendrick pushed the folder back to me, using a discreet recording application on my phone. The digital evidence of his fully executed signature was already safely stored in a secure encrypted cloud folder. I opened my messages and selected the secure chat thread with Roxanne, my brilliant and terrifyingly ruthless attorney. I attached the hidden photograph of his arrogant, aggressive signature on the final page of the amended settlement agreement. I stared at the screen, feeling a deep, profound sense of ultimate finality settling over my mind. I typed a short, precise message to accompany the photographic evidence of our absolute massive victory. The devil just signed his own permanent death warrant. I typed, my fingers flying across the digital keyboard with smooth, unwavering confidence. He did not even bother to read the mutual waiver clause. He is completely blinded by his own greed and his desperate need to protect the offshore funds he stole from our marriage. The trap is perfectly flawlessly set. See you in court, Roxanne. I hit the send button and watched the small notification confirm the message was successfully delivered to her high-rise downtown office. A waitress wearing a stained yellow apron walked over to my booth holding a steaming pot of cheap black coffee. She looked down at the crumpled $10 bill on the table and then up at my face, offering a small, sympathetic smile, clearly assuming I had just been brutally dumped by a wealthy, arrogant man. "Can I get you anything else, honey?" the waitress asked kindly, her voice soft and maternal. I looked up at her and smiled, a genuine, bright, radiant smile that reached all the way to my eyes. "Actually, I am doing perfectly fine," I replied, my voice completely steady and filled with quiet, immense power. I picked up the $10 bill and handed it directly to her. "Keep the change," I added smoothly. "I am about to come into a very large amount of money, and I definitely will not be needing this anymore." I stood up from the sticky booth, smoothing down the front of my faded gray sweater. I walked out of the dingy, run-down diner, stepping into the bright, warm morning sunlight. I climbed into my old, reliable sedan and started the engine, feeling more alive, more powerful, and more incredibly dangerous than I had ever felt in my entire 34 years of existence. Kendrick thought he had completely destroyed the mother of his children today. I thought he had successfully relegated me to a lifetime of extreme poverty and endless suffering. He thought he was the ultimate untouchable mastermind of black corporate excellence. But he was just a foolish, arrogant, small-minded man walking blindly toward an absolute financial slaughter. The divorce hearing was scheduled for next month, and I was going to use every single second of that time preparing to drop a $91 million bomb directly onto his massive, fragile ego. The real battle was finally over, and the total, absolute execution was about to begin. I drove back towards the luxury penthouse suite, ready to hold my children and prepare for the ultimate courtroom showdown today. The atmosphere at the elite Buckhead Country Club was suffocatingly opulent. Less than 48 hours after our encounter at the dingy diner, Kendrick and his mother Brenda had already organized a massive, extravagant celebration. They called it a networking event, but everyone in their wealthy social circle knew exactly what it really was. It was a divorce party. It was a public coronation for Jasmine, carefully designed to introduce his 24-year-old mistress to Atlanta high society as his new intellectual and social equal. Brenda had spared absolutely no expense for the lavish evening. She had rented out the grand ballroom, filling the massive space with towering white floral arrangements, crystal champagne towers, and a live jazz band playing softly in the corner. She wanted to send a very clear, brutal message to the entire community that her son had successfully shed his dead weight and was moving on to a much brighter, far more lucrative future. From the reports Roxanne received from her private investigators, Kendrick was parading Jasmine around the ballroom like a shiny new trophy. He was introducing her to powerful corporate executives and wealthy investors, proudly boasting about her master's degree in finance. He was actively laying the groundwork for his completely fabricated narrative. He was telling anyone who would listen that I had suffered a severe mental breakdown, that I was completely destitute, and that he had been forced to let me go for the sake of his own sanity and professional reputation. He was playing the ultimate role of the tragic, successful martyr of black excellence who had been dragged down by an ungrateful, lazy housewife. He felt absolutely invincible standing in the center of that glittering ballroom, completely surrounded by his enabling, toxic family and his wealthy, gullible peers. He thought he had already won the war forever. But he had absolutely no idea that a massive $91 million storm was currently brewing just outside the heavy brass doors of the country club. I sat in the back of the chauffeured luxury Escalade looking at my reflection in the tinted window. I did not look like the broken, desperate woman who had cried in the diner. I looked like absolute, untouchable power. Earlier that afternoon, I had visited an exclusive high-end designer boutique in downtown Atlanta using my new black Centurion card. I had purchased a breathtaking, impeccably tailored emerald green silk pantsuit that fit my body with flawless, razor-sharp precision. The rich, vibrant color complemented my skin perfectly, making me look radiant, confident, and incredibly dangerous. I wore a pair of towering designer heels that clicked with authority, and I had my natural hair styled into an elegant, commanding crown. I wore absolutely no jewelry, refusing to let shiny accessories distract from the sheer lethal confidence radiating from my eyes. I looked exactly like a woman who could buy and sell the entire country club without checking her bank balance twice. Roxanne sat beside me in the spacious leather back seat, looking equally magnificent and terrifying in her signature sharp black suit. Resting on her lap was a thick stack of heavy legal envelopes sealed with official red wax. These were not just standard divorce papers. These were formal, aggressive legal subpoenas, demanding total comprehensive financial discovery and explicitly citing severe penalties for perjury and corporate fraud. We were not just crashing a party today. We were launching a highly coordinated public legal execution. "Are you ready, Naomi?" Roxanne asked, her voice smooth and filled with intense, predatory anticipation. I smoothed the lapel of my emerald green suit and took a deep, steadying breath. "I am ready," I replied, my voice completely calm and devoid of any lingering fear. "Let us go ruin their perfect night." The chauffeur opened the heavy doors of the SUV, and Roxanne and I stepped out onto the pristine circular driveway of the country club. The valet staff immediately stepped back, sensing the immense, powerful energy rolling off us. We walked past the manicured hedges and pushed open the massive brass double doors of the grand ballroom. The moment we stepped inside the bustling room, the shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous and dramatic. The loud, joyful chatter of the wealthy elite guests immediately began to falter and die down. Heads turned in our direction, and a wave of shocked whispering rippled through the expansive ballroom. The guests parted like the Red Sea, creating a wide-open path directly through the center of the elegant venue. I kept my chin high and my posture absolutely perfectly straight, walking with slow, deliberate, measured strides. I owned the room the exact second my designer heels hit the polished marble floor. Suddenly, a figure darted out from the crowd, trying to block my path. It was Brittany, my white sister-in-law, wearing an overly tight sequined dress and holding a half-empty glass of expensive champagne. Her face was flushed with anger and disbelief as her eyes frantically scanned my immaculate, flawless designer outfit. She had spent years treating me like a peasant, and seeing me exude such intense, undeniable wealth and power completely short-circuited her brain. "What do you think you are doing here, Naomi?" Brittany hissed, stepping directly in front of me, with a nasty, condescending sneer. "Security will be here in a minute to throw you out. Did you use your absolute last pathetic pennies to rent that suit just to come here and beg for your husband back? You are embarrassing yourself terribly today. Go back to the shelter where you belong before Kendrick calls the police immediately." I did not stop walking. I did not even slow my pace. I simply locked my eyes onto hers with a gaze so incredibly cold and devoid of basic respect that Brittany instinctively took a step backward. "Move out of my way." "Brittany," I commanded, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying enough lethal authority to echo in the quiet space around us. "You are completely out of your depth tonight, and I do not have time to entertain the help right now." Brittany gasped, her mouth falling open in sheer absolute shock at being dismissed so casually and brutally in front of the wealthy elite guests. She stumbled out of my path, spilling a splash of her champagne onto the marble floor. I glided right past her, ignoring her sputtering outrage entirely. Roxanne followed closely behind me, a cool, confident smirk playing on her lips. At the far end of the grand ballroom, standing near the towering crystal champagne fountain, stood Kendrick, Jasmine, and Brenda. They had finally noticed the sudden heavy silence descending upon the room and turned to see what was causing the massive disruption. Kendrick froze completely, his expensive crystal glass hovering halfway to his mouth. Jasmine clutched his arm, her eyes widening as she took in my breathtaking appearance. Brenda looked like she had just seen a ghost from her past, her hand flying up to clutch the pearls resting against her chest. I walked directly up to the three of them, stopping just a few feet away. The entire ballroom of Atlanta high society was watching us with bated breath, hanging on to every single word and movement. The silence was so profound that you could hear the soft clinking of the ice in the nearby bartender station clearly. Naomi Kendrick finally managed to say, his voice tight with rising panic and confusion. He looked at my designer suit, trying to reconcile the powerful, radiant woman standing in front of him with the broken, weeping housewife he had left in the diner just 48 hours ago. "What are you doing here today? How did you even get past the front gate outside?" I did not answer him right away. I let the silence stretch, letting his anxiety build under the heavy scrutiny of his wealthy peers. I smiled a slow, dangerous smile. "I am here to deliver a message, Kendrick," I said smoothly, projecting my voice so the surrounding guests could hear me clearly. "You wanted to celebrate the end of our marriage publicly, so I decided to bring the paperwork directly to your little party." Roxanne stepped forward flawlessly, taking the floor with her commanding legal presence. She held up the thick stack of sealed legal envelopes, holding them high, so the entire room could see the official court markings. "Kendrick, Brenda, and Terrence." Roxanne announced, her voice ringing loudly and clearly across the grand ballroom. "Consider yourselves officially and formally served with subpoenas for massive financial discovery, corporate embezzlement, and perjury. We have filed motions to investigate the illegal siphoning of marital assets and the fraudulent concealment of $2 million in offshore accounts." The guests gasped collectively. A loud wave of shocked murmurs erupted across the room as the wealthy corporate investors and socialites began whispering frantically to each other. The word embezzlement hung in the air like toxic poison, completely shattering Kendrick and his carefully crafted image of black corporate excellence. Kendrick turned beet red, his chest heaving with sudden explosive anger. He snatched the envelopes from Roxanne, and his hands waving them around wildly to the crowd, trying desperately to regain control of the narrative. "Do not listen to a single word this woman says," Kendrick shouted, forcing a loud fake laugh that sounded incredibly desperate and hollow. "My ex-wife is completely delusional today. She suffered a total mental breakdown. She has $0 to her name, and she is just trying to extort me because I finally cut her off. She signed an agreement waiving all her rights. She has absolutely nothing left forever." He glared at me, trying to use his anger to intimidate me into backing down. "You are pathetic, Naomi," he sneered, leaning closer. "You think renting a nice suit and bringing a loud lawyer changes anything at all. You are broke. You are going to lose the kids, and you are going to end up with nothing. Now get out of my party before I have you arrested for harassment right now." I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I looked at the man who had tormented me for 10 years, who had tried to leave me destitute, and who had dragged my name through the dirt constantly. His arrogant words meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. He was standing on a trapdoor, and I was holding the heavy lever. I took a slow, graceful step forward, bypassing Kendrick completely and moving directly toward my cruel mother-in-law, Brenda. Brenda stiffened, trying to maintain her haughty, superior posture, but I could see the genuine terror flashing deep in her eyes. I leaned in very close to her, letting my face stop just inches from her ear. "Enjoy the champagne, Brenda," I whispered softly, my voice carrying a promise of total, absolute financial destruction. "It is the last glass you will ever be able to afford." Brenda gasped audibly, stumbling backward and bumping hard into the table behind her, causing the crystal glasses to rattle dangerously. I pulled back, smoothing the front of my emerald green jacket one last time. I gave Kendrick and Jasmine a final cold, dismissive glance before turning my back on them entirely. "Let us go, Roxanne," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the frantic whispers of the shocked crowd. The air in here is incredibly cheap and suffocating tonight. I walked out of the grand ballroom exactly as I had entered, with slow, deliberate, flawless strides. I did not look back at the chaos I had just unleashed. I left behind a massive cloud of paranoia, panic, and total social ruin. Kendrick was frantically trying to reassure his wealthy investors, while Brenda hyperventilated in the corner. The rumor mill of Atlanta high society was already spinning out of control, and his pristine corporate reputation was bleeding out on the marble floor rapidly. I stepped out into the warm evening air, feeling a profound sense of ultimate victory. The public execution had officially begun, and the courtroom battle was going to be an absolute brutal, beautiful massacre soon. The heavy, polished oak doors of the Fulton County Courthouse swung open, revealing a massive, crowded courtroom bustling with tense, nervous energy. I walked down the center aisle, keeping my head held perfectly high and my posture absolutely straight. Roxanne walked right beside me, her pristine briefcase clutched in her hand, radiating pure, lethal confidence. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a harsh, unforgiving glow over the formal wooden benches and the elevated judge podium at the front of the room. This was the day of the final divorce and custody hearing. I wore a simple but elegantly tailored dark charcoal suit, devoid of any flashy jewelry. I wanted the judge to see a serious, focused, and highly responsible mother who was entirely dedicated to protecting her teenage children. As I approached the petitioner table, I could feel the heavy, burning stares of Kendrick and his arrogant family piercing into my back. They had arrived early and claimed an entire row of seats in the viewing gallery. I glanced briefly over my shoulder and saw my cruel mother-in-law Brenda sitting right in the center. She wore heavy gold jewelry and a bright designer dress inappropriate for a court of law. Sitting directly next to her was my white sister-in-law Brittany and my spineless brother-in-law Terrence. Brittany was clutching a massive, ostentatious luxury handbag, resting it on her lap like a hard, shiny shield. She leaned over, whispering something malicious into Brenda's ear, and then pointed a long, manicured finger directly at my simple, dark suit. They let out a condescending scoff, assuming I purchased my clothing from a discount rack. Sitting in the very front row of the gallery, directly behind the respondent table, was Jasmine. Kendrick had actually brought his 24-year-old mistress to his own divorce hearing. She was wearing a skin-tight white dress that left absolutely nothing to the imagination, and she had her legs crossed, displaying a pair of towering red-bottom heels. She caught my eye and offered a slow, mocking smirk, raising her left hand to deliberately flash the massive diamond ring Kendrick had purchased using our stolen marital funds. I simply looked away from her, completely unbothered by her cheap, childish tactics. I took my seat next to Roxanne, folding my hands neatly on the wooden table. I was there to obliterate the man who tried to leave my children destitute. The heavy side door opened, and the bailiff instructed the entire courtroom to rise. The judge walked in, taking his place at the high, elevated bench. He was a stern older man with sharp, perceptive eyes and a deeply serious, no-nonsense demeanor. He settled into his large leather chair and adjusted his reading glasses, looking down at the thick stack of legal files resting on his desk. He called the court to order, his deep voice echoing loudly against the wood-paneled walls. He announced that we were there to resolve the final terms of the divorce settlement and to make a permanent ruling regarding the physical and legal custody of Jamal and Kira. He noted that an amended settlement agreement had already been signed and submitted to the court by both parties. Roxanne and I remained perfectly silent, waiting for the arrogant fool across the aisle to make his first massive, critical mistake. The judge asked Kendrick to take the witness stand to provide his sworn testimony regarding the custody arrangements. Kendrick stood up from his table, adjusting the lapels of his custom-tailored $1,000 suit. He walked up to the wooden witness box with a slow, confident, arrogant swagger that made my stomach churn. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth before sitting down and leaning forward toward the microphone. He looked incredibly comfortable and deeply self-assured. He genuinely believed this entire courtroom was his personal stage, and the judge was just another captive audience member waiting to be charmed by his immense corporate success. Kendrick smiled, a practiced professional smile, folding his hands together and making direct, steady eye contact with the stern judge. Kendrick began to speak, and his performance was nothing short of a masterful theatrical manipulation. He painted a detailed, elaborate picture of himself as the ultimate hard-working, resilient martyr of Black excellence. He spoke in a low, persuasive voice, describing the grueling 80-hour work weeks he endured. He claimed he had sacrificed his own personal happiness for an entire decade just to keep a roof over our heads. And then he skillfully, completely turned the narrative against me. He described me as a lazy, uneducated, and profoundly ungrateful woman who refused to evolve or contribute to the household. He claimed I abandoned my freelance career because I lacked the ambition required to succeed. I tried to uplift her. Your Honor, Kendrick said, his voice dripping with fake sorrow and manufactured disappointment. I offered to pay for her to go back to school. I offered to help her start a new business, but she absolutely refused to work. She wanted to sit in our mansion and do absolutely nothing while I carried the entire massive financial burden of the family alone. She isolated herself. She stopped trying to improve. She is nothing without my bank account and my hard work. I had to finally make the incredibly difficult, painful decision to let her go because she was actively dragging down my professional legacy and setting a terrible, lazy example for our two impressionable teenage children. I listened to his brutal, calculated lies without letting a single muscle in my face twitch. I could hear Brenda and Brittany murmuring in agreement from the gallery section loudly enough for the court reporter to hear. Kendrick continued his testimony, shifting his focus to Jamal and Kira. He gripped the edges of the witness stand, looking deeply concerned and appropriately distressed. Your Honor, my children are my entire world. Kendrick lied smoothly, without breaking eye contact with the judge. I have always provided them with the absolute best education at an elite private academy. They are accustomed to a very high standard of living, a safe, secure neighborhood, and a stable, structured environment. If you grant any form of shared physical custody to my ex-wife, you will be placing those innocent children in immediate severe danger. Kendrick paused for dramatic effect, shaking his head slowly. Naomi is practically destitute, Your Honor, Kendrick stated firmly. She waived her rights to my assets because she contributed nothing to our wealth. She has zero income and zero savings. She is currently living in a highly dangerous, rundown area on the very edge of the city. I saw her at a filthy diner wearing ragged clothes, begging me not to cut her off. She is entirely unfit to share custody of Jamal and Kira. She cannot even afford to feed herself, let alone provide a healthy environment for a 14-year-old boy and a 12-year-old girl. Kendrick leaned closer to the microphone, his dark eyes gleaming with absolute malicious triumph. Therefore, I am formally requesting that this court grant me sole, absolute physical and legal custody of both children immediately. Kendrick demanded, his voice ringing with untouchable authority. I am requesting that Naomi be granted only strictly supervised visitation rights, and only after she proves she has secured a minimum wage job and a safe apartment. I cannot in good conscience allow my successful legacy to be corrupted by a woman who has completely given up on life and sunk to the absolute bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. My children belong with me in the Buckhead mansion, where their futures can be properly protected and heavily funded by my vast superior wealth. Kendrick finished his long, horrific testimony and leaned back in the wooden witness chair, crossing his legs comfortably. He looked at the gallery and shot a quick, arrogant smirk directly at Jasmine, who beamed back at him. Brenda nodded vigorously, her earrings swinging. Brittany leaned back, crossing her arms and looking at me as if I were a piece of garbage. They thought Kendrick manipulated the judge into handing over full control of my children while leaving me to rot in deep poverty. The judge frowned deeply, picking up his pen and making a few sharp, quick notes on his legal pad. The courtroom was dead silent, hanging on his every single movement. He set the pen down and folded his hands together, resting his chin on his knuckles. He slowly turned his head, looking over the rim of his reading glasses directly at the respondent table, where Roxanne and I were sitting in total, absolute silence. His expression was incredibly stern and unyielding. The judge looked at me with a mixture of professional skepticism and judicial concern, clearly weighing the heavy, damaging accusations Kendrick had just leveled against my character and my current financial reality. Counselor, the judge said, his deep, authoritative voice cutting through the heavy tension in the large, crowded courtroom. Your client has just been accused of severe financial instability and utter parental neglect. Her husband paints a very dire, tragic picture of her current living situation and her total lack of monetary resources. According to his sworn testimony, she has no home, no job, no savings, and no reliable way to support these two growing children. The judge paused, flipping open the thick manila folder containing our amended settlement agreement. And I see here that she voluntarily signed away all rights to spousal support and marital property, leaving her essentially completely penniless. The judge tapped his finger against the heavy wooden bench, his eyes narrowing slightly as he stared down at Roxanne. The family court has a primary fundamental duty to protect the best interests, physical safety, and overall well-being of the minor children involved in this dispute, the judge stated firmly. I cannot, and will not, grant any form of physical or legal custody to a parent who cannot provide basic human necessities. Before I make my final binding ruling on this permanent custody arrangement, I need to know the absolute undeniable truth right now today. I need to know how exactly your client plans to feed, clothe, and house these children with zero reported income and zero visible assets to her name. Kendrick let out a soft, muffled chuckle from the witness stand, shaking his head, as if the judge had just confirmed the most obvious fact in the entire world. He smirked at Jasmine again, relishing the absolute total public humiliation he believed he had just successfully inflicted upon me. He thought Roxanne was going to stand up and beg for mercy or ask for a temporary delay to help me find a minimum wage job somewhere far away. I thought his $2 million offshore account was completely safe and his total victory was completely assured forever. But Kendrick had no idea what was actually resting inside the sleek black leather briefcase sitting on the table directly in front of my incredibly powerful, brilliant, dedicated, unstoppable lawyer. Roxanne did not flinch at all. She did not look nervous or intimidated by the judge or his strict, stern questioning regarding my supposed deep poverty. Instead, Roxanne slowly, smoothly, and confidently stood up from her wooden chair. She smoothed the front of her sharp crimson suit jacket, adjusting her posture to radiate pure, unfiltered, total dominance. She looked directly at Kendrick sitting in the witness box, and then she turned her dark, piercing, intelligent eyes toward the stern, waiting judge. A slow, dangerous, highly lethal smile spread across her face, making the entire courtroom suddenly feel very, very cold and extremely dangerously quiet. She was thoroughly prepared to absolutely dismantle every single lie Kendrick had just arrogantly spoken under oath. The moment of ultimate brutal reckoning had finally arrived, and we were fully ready to completely destroy his fragile empire. Roxanne stepped out from behind the heavy wooden respondent table with a slow, graceful stride that immediately commanded the attention of every single person in the massive room. Her crimson suit caught the harsh fluorescent lighting as she walked toward the center of the courtroom. She did not look like a defense attorney preparing to beg for mercy on behalf of a destitute client. She looked like an apex predator circling her trapped prey. Kendrick watched her approach from the elevated witness stand, his arrogant smirk faltering just a fraction of an inch. He shifted his weight in the wooden chair, suddenly hyper-aware of her intense, calculating gaze. The stern judge leaned forward, resting his forearms on the high mahogany bench, waiting for Roxanne to begin her desperate defense of my supposed financial ruin, instead of immediately addressing my living situation or pleading for temporary child support. Roxanne completely pivoted her entire legal strategy. She walked over to the wooden podium and adjusted the microphone. "Mr. Kendrick," she began, her voice ringing with crisp, professional authority, "you have spent the last 30 minutes painting a very vivid picture for this honorable court. You claim you were the sole financial provider for your family. You testified under oath that you carried the entire monetary burden of the household alone, while your wife allegedly refused to contribute. Is that an accurate summary of your sworn testimony today?" Kendrick puffed out his chest, his confidence returning rapidly. "Yes, that is absolutely correct," he replied, his voice dripping with intense condescension. "I worked grueling 80-hour weeks at the investment bank to ensure my family lived in absolute luxury. Every single dollar that entered our joint bank accounts was generated by my hard work and my relentless dedication to Black excellence." Roxanne nodded slowly, acting as if she were deeply impressed by his incredible work ethic. That is truly fascinating, Mr. Kendrick, she said, smoothly pacing back and forth in front of the witness box. You must have generated a massive amount of wealth during your 10-year marriage. In fact, according to the tax returns you submitted to this court, your annual bonuses alone regularly exceeded $500,000. Yet you claim your wife drained your resources so severely that you were forced to cut her off entirely to protect your financial legacy. Absolutely, Kendrick agreed, leaning closer to the microphone. She was a massive financial drain. I had to protect my hard-earned money from her reckless, lazy spending habits. Roxanne stopped pacing and turned to face him directly. Her dark eyes locked onto his face with a terrifying intensity. Protect your money, you say? Roxanne echoed her tone, dropping into a dangerous, lethal register. Tell me, Mr. Kendrick, did protecting your hard-earned money involve executing 24 separate international wire transfers over the past 18 months? The air in the courtroom suddenly felt incredibly thick and heavy. Kendrick froze completely. His posture went entirely rigid, and the smug, arrogant smile vanished from his face instantly. What are you talking about? Kendrick stammered, his voice suddenly tight and deeply defensive. I make various international investments for my corporate clients all the time. It is a standard part of my job as an investment banking director. Roxanne smiled, a cold, ruthless smile that sent a visible shiver down his spine. I am not talking about your corporate clients, Mr. Kendrick. Roxanne clarified, her voice echoing loudly across the silent room. I am talking about your personal marital assets. Specifically, I am asking you to explain to this court why you secretly transferred exactly $2 million from your joint marital savings into a hidden offshore bank account located in the Cayman Islands. And more importantly, I want you to explain why that secret offshore account is registered entirely under the name of Jasmine Carter. A massive, loud collective gasp erupted from the viewing gallery. I did not turn around, but I could hear the absolute chaos unfolding behind me. Brenda let out a sharp, choking sound, loudly clutching her heavy gold pearls as if she were having a sudden heart attack. Brittany gasped, dramatically whispering frantic, panicked questions to Terrence, who sat frozen in sheer disbelief. In the very front row, Jasmine physically jumped in her seat, her face turning chalk white as her secret illegal financial windfall was suddenly exposed to the entire world. Kendrick began to sweat profusely. Large beads of perspiration formed on his forehead, shining under the harsh courtroom lights. He gripped the edges of the wooden witness stand, his knuckles turning completely white. That is not true, Kendrick stammered wildly, his eyes darting toward his own defense attorney, who looked equally shocked and entirely unprepared for this massive revelation. Those were legitimate business investments. You are twisting standard banking procedures to make me look incredibly bad today. Roxanne did not even blink. She walked calmly back to our respondent table and picked up a massive, thick stack of certified banking documents. The papers were heavily stamped with official red ink, proving their undeniable authenticity. She walked back to the center of the room and slammed the entire heavy stack of documents directly onto the wooden ledge of the witness box, right under his sweating, panicked face. These are certified, authenticated bank statements obtained directly by my forensic accounting team. Roxanne announced, her voice projecting absolute, undeniable authority. They clearly document every single illegal transfer you made. You systematically drained your joint marital accounts, hiding $2 million to ensure your wife would be left completely destitute when you finally filed for divorce. You used your 24-year-old assistant as a human shield to commit severe financial fraud and successfully evade divorce discovery laws. The judge slammed his heavy wooden gavel against the sounding block, demanding immediate order in his courtroom. The loud, sharp cracks echoed like gunshots, silencing the frantic whispers in the gallery. The judge turned his furious, piercing gaze toward Kendrick, leaning far over his elevated bench. Mr. Kendrick, the judge roared, his voice trembling with righteous judicial anger. Is this true? Did you intentionally hide $2 million of marital assets in an offshore account to defraud your wife during these divorce proceedings today? Kendrick looked at the furious judge, then at the massive stack of undeniable banking evidence resting in front of him. He looked out at the gallery where his wealthy peers and family members were staring at him in total, absolute horror. The pristine, flawless image of black corporate excellence he had spent a decade building was completely shattered, bleeding out on the courtroom floor. He was caught red-handed, and he knew there was absolutely no way to deny the hard, concrete financial evidence staring him right in the face. Instead of showing any genuine remorse or asking the court for immediate mercy, Kendrick defaulted to the only defense mechanism he truly intimately knew. He defaulted to pure, unadulterated toxic arrogance. He pushed himself violently back in the wooden chair, wiping the sweat from his forehead and puffing out his chest with desperate, aggressive defiance. "So what if I moved my own money?" Kendrick shouted, his voice echoing aggressively across the room. He pointed an angry, shaking finger directly at me. "I earned every single penny of that $2 million. She sat at home doing absolutely nothing while I killed myself at the bank. It is my wealth, and I had every single right to protect it from a lazy, ungrateful parasite. Mr. Kendrick, you are confessing to severe financial fraud in my courtroom," the judge warned sternly, his face dark with pure, absolute fury. "It does not matter what you call it," Kendrick yelled back, completely losing his temper and his professional composure. "It does not matter because she already signed the new agreement. She voluntarily signed the amended settlement papers last week. She legally waived her right to all of my assets, including my investments and my offshore accounts. I made sure my money was fully protected. She gets nothing, and she has nothing. She is entirely broke, and I am keeping my wealth." Kendrick stood up slightly in the witness box, leaning over the microphone with a wild, desperate, victorious glare. "You cannot touch my money," he boasted loudly, glaring at Roxanne and me. "She signed it all away. She is destitute, and she deserves to be destitute. Now give me full custody of my children, so I can take them home and leave her to rot in the dirty streets." The sheer level of venomous cruelty and unapologetic greed in his voice stunned everyone in the room. He had just publicly admitted to stealing $2 million from his own family, but he was so blinded by his own narcissism that he genuinely believed the signed contract made him completely untouchable. He thought his manipulative coffee shop trap had successfully shielded him from any and all consequences forever. The judge slammed his gavel down again, striking the wooden block with such massive force that the sound cracked like thunder. The entire courtroom immediately fell into a heavy, terrified silence. The judge took a deep breath, attempting to control his immense judicial fury. He looked at Kendrick with a gaze filled with profound, absolute disgust. "Mr. Kendrick, your actions are highly unethical, deeply manipulative, and morally reprehensible." The judge stated, his voice vibrating with barely contained anger. "You have displayed a shocking level of deceit and a profound lack of respect for the legal integrity of this institution. You deliberately attempted to leave the mother of your children in abject poverty while hoarding millions of dollars for yourself and your young mistress." The judge paused, picking up the amended settlement agreement that rested on his desk. He flipped to the final page, staring at the bold black ink signatures at the bottom. However, the judge continued his tone, dropping into a heavy, reluctant resignation. "The law binds me to the documents officially submitted before this court. The waiver of independent assets is indeed clearly signed and fully executed by both parties. Despite your horrific, fraudulent behavior, your wife legally surrendered her right to contest your hidden financial accounts when she signed this binding mutual agreement." Kendrick let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief, falling back into his chair and wiping his brow. He shot a triumphant, arrogant smirk toward Jasmine in the gallery. He had survived the ambush. He believed he had successfully weathered the storm and secured his stolen fortune forever. The judge turned his attention away from Kendrick and focused his intense, serious gaze directly onto Roxanne, who was still standing tall and perfectly composed in the center of the room. The judge adjusted his reading glasses, his expression filled with deep concern for my future and the future of my children. "Now, Attorney Roxanne," the judge said, his voice firm and commanding, "I will ask you one last time. Your client has voluntarily waived her rights to her husband and his extensive wealth. She has walked away from the marital estate with absolutely zero financial support. Before I can legally rule on the permanent custody of these two minor children, I must have concrete, undeniable proof of her ability to provide for them. What are your client and her independent assets to support these children today, right now? Kendrick chuckled softly from the witness stand, shaking his head in mocking pity. He looked at me, expecting to see a shattered, weeping woman begging the court for a small mercy stipend. He thought I was completely destroyed. He thought I was nothing but dust beneath his expensive designer shoes. I did not look at Kendrick. I did not look at the gallery I kept. My eyes fixed entirely on my brilliant attorney Roxanne, slowly turned her head and looked back at me. Her dark eyes sparkled with fierce, undeniable, lethal power. She offered me a single slow, deliberate nod. Roxanne turned her head slowly and looked back at me, her dark eyes sparkling with fierce, lethal power. She offered me a single, deliberate nod. I felt a profound sense of peace wash over my body as I nodded back, giving my silent permission to finally drop the ultimate $91 million bomb on the man who had tried to destroy me. The massive, tense courtroom was holding its collective breath, waiting to hear how a supposedly destitute mother could possibly convince a family court judge to grant her custody of two children. Kendrick sat in the witness stand, still wearing that smug, arrogant smile. He genuinely thought I had absolutely nothing. He thought Roxanne was just trying to hopelessly delay the inevitable permanent loss of my children. Roxanne turned her attention back to the elevated mahogany bench, and she did not look nervous or defeated at all. She reached down and picked up her sleek, pristine black leather briefcase, placing it gently onto the solid wooden respondent table. The soft click of the metal clasps opening echoed loudly in the silent, tense courtroom. She reached inside the velvet-lined compartment and pulled out a single thick, heavily watermarked, legally certified document packet. It was enclosed in a premium dark blue protective folder bearing the official gold-embossed seal of the most prestigious wealth management law firm in the entire state of Texas. She closed her briefcase and walked slowly and purposefully toward the center of the room, carrying the heavy blue folder like a loaded weapon. "Your Honor," Roxanne said, her voice echoing with a smooth, chilling authority. "My client is completely, fully, and undeniably capable of providing a safe, secure, luxurious, and highly stable environment for her two minor children. In fact, she is far more capable of providing for them than her deceitful, fraudulent husband could ever possibly imagine. I am formally submitting into evidence my client and her verified declaration of independent assets, fully authenticated and completely certified by federal banking authorities." Roxanne handed the original thick blue folder to the armed bailiff, who carried it up the short wooden steps and placed it directly onto the judge and his elevated desk. Roxanne then turned and walked over to the petitioner table where Kendrick and his deeply confused defense attorney were sitting. She dropped a perfectly identical certified copy of the massive financial document right in front of the lawyer. The heavy slap of the paper against the hard wood made Kendrick flinch visibly. His arrogant smile began to falter slightly, replaced by a creeping shadow of undeniable paranoia. He leaned forward in the witness box, trying to get a better look at the folder resting in front of his lawyer. But he was too far away to read the bold black text printed on the first page. The stern judge adjusted his reading glasses and picked up the heavy watermarked document. He opened the dark blue cover and began to read the first page. The entire courtroom watched in absolute silence as the judge and his eyes suddenly widened behind his thick glass lenses. His gray eyebrows shot up toward his forehead in a display of pure judicial shock. He flipped to the second page, then the third, reading the complex financial statements and the official estate transfer confirmations with profound disbelief. He looked up from the document, his sharp eyes darting directly toward me, sitting quietly at the respondent table. He looked at my simple dark charcoal suit, and then he looked back down at the astronomical, impossible numbers printed officially on the legal paper in his hands. The silence in the large, crowded courtroom stretched out for what felt like an absolute eternity. Every person in the viewing gallery, including Kendrick and his toxic family, could sense that the fundamental power dynamic in the room had just experienced a massive tectonic shift. Brenda stopped fanning herself with her expensive designer program. Brittany sat up perfectly straight, clutching her luxury leather handbag tightly against her chest. Jasmine leaned forward in the front row, her eyes darting nervously between Kendrick and the judge. Kendrick wiped a fresh bead of cold sweat from his temple, his heart rate visibly increasing as he watched the judge scrutinize the certified banking documents. He knew Roxanne would not submit a fake document to a federal judge, but his fragile ego prohibited him from understanding what independent assets I could possibly possess. Finally, the stern judge slowly set the thick blue folder down onto his heavy wooden desk. He took off his reading glasses, folding them carefully, and placing them next to his wooden gavel. He let out a long, slow breath, shaking his head in absolute sheer amazement. He looked directly at Kendrick, who was currently gripping the edges of the witness stand with pure white knuckles. Mr. Kendrick, the judge, began, his deep voice carrying a strange new tone of complete absolute disbelief combined with intense judicial fury. You just spent a considerable amount of time under oath, testifying that your wife is a destitute, broken, useless woman who contributes absolutely nothing to society. You claimed she has zero income, zero savings, and zero ability to feed or house your two children. You confidently demanded that I strip her of all physical and legal custody based entirely on her supposed inescapable poverty. Kendrick swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing nervously. Yes, Your Honor. Kendrick stammered, his voice suddenly sounding incredibly small and terribly weak. She has absolutely nothing. I froze all her accounts. She is completely broke. The judge picked up his heavy wooden gavel and slammed it down onto the sounding block with a massive explosive force that made Kendrick jump out of his seat. You are completely, profoundly, and devastatingly wrong. Mr. Kendrick, the judge roared, his voice booming across the silent, terrified courtroom. The certified, authenticated federal banking documents resting right here on my desk prove that your entire testimony is nothing but a pathetic, malicious, arrogant delusion. Let the official court record reflect right now today that Naomi possesses a verified independent inheritance trust transferred directly from the estate of her late grandfather Elijah. The judge paused, letting his heavy, dramatic words sink into the minds of every single person listening in the gallery. He looked down at the paper, tracing his finger over the final total column. Then he looked back up at Kendrick, his eyes burning with pure, absolute judicial contempt. The trust fund is fully liquid, entirely unencumbered, and officially registered, solely in her name, the judge announced, his voice ringing with undeniable ultimate authority, totaling a net verified liquid asset worth of exactly $91.6 million. The number dropped into the silent, crowded courtroom like a massive explosive nuclear bomb. $91.6 million. The astronomical, impossible, staggering figure echoed against the dark wood-paneled walls, bouncing off the high ceiling and crashing directly into the minds of my cruel, abusive in-laws. For a split second, the entire room remained frozen in a state of pure collective paralysis. Nobody could breathe. Nobody could blink. Nobody could fully comprehend the sheer magnitude of the wealth I had just successfully hidden from all of them. Then the total, absolute carnage finally began. In the viewing gallery, Brenda let out a loud, terrifying gasp that sounded like a woman drowning. Her eyes rolled back into her head as the devastating shock of the $91 million revelation hit her frail, greedy heart. She realized she had spent 10 years viciously abusing a woman who was infinitely richer than her entire family combined. She gasped for air, clutching her chest and her gold pearl necklace with trembling hands. Her knees gave out completely, and she physically collapsed backward, falling heavily into Terrence and his waiting arms as the gallery erupted into complete chaotic panic, sitting directly next to the unconscious. Brenda Brittany experienced her own devastating psychological collapse. The white sister-in-law, who had spent years using racist microaggressions to keep me in my place, suddenly realized she had been acting superior to a woman holding nearly $100 million in cash. Brittany stared at me with wide, terrified, completely hollow eyes. All the blood rapidly drained from her face, turning her skin chalk white. She realized her entire identity, built on feeling socially superior to the black working-class girl, was a complete joke. Her hands began to shake so violently that she lost her grip on her expensive designer Birkin bag. The luxury purse slipped from her trembling fingers and dropped heavily onto the courtroom floor, spilling her cosmetics everywhere. She just sat there staring at me, paralyzed by the immense crushing weight of her own total humiliation. In the very front row, Jasmine scrambled backward in her wooden seat, her mouth hanging wide open in pure, unadulterated shock. The 24-year-old mistress, who thought she had successfully stolen a wealthy, powerful man, suddenly realized she had actually chained herself to a broke, desperate criminal who just lost the greatest financial windfall of his entire pathetic life. She looked at Kendrick with a gaze filled with sudden, intense, profound disgust, realizing he was nothing but a massive failure who had just completely ruined their entire future together. But the most beautiful, spectacular, and deeply satisfying reaction came directly from the witness stand. When the judge uttered the words, $91.6 million, Kendrick completely lost his mind. The fragile, narcissistic ego he had spent his entire life building violently shattered into a million tiny, unrecoverable pieces. He stood up so fast that his heavy wooden chair tipped backward and crashed loudly onto the floor behind him. His face turned a deep, dangerous shade of purple, and the veins in his neck bulged visibly against his expensive silk collar. He slammed both of his fists down onto the wooden ledge of the witness box, his eyes bulging out of his skull in pure, greedy, desperate, psychotic rage. "Objection!" Kendrick screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice cracking with wild, uncontrollable panic. "That is a complete, total lie. That is absolutely impossible. She does not have $91 million. She is a broke, useless copywriter from a poor neighborhood." The judge glared at him, demanding complete silence. He looked at the thick blue folder resting on the judge and his desk, and his mind desperately tried to claim ownership of the massive, unimaginable fortune. "If she actually has $91 million, then I am legally entitled to exactly half of it," Kendrick yelled, pointing a desperate, shaking finger directly at me. "She is my wife. That is marital property. I demand my $45 million right now." The stern judge picked up his heavy wooden gavel and slammed it down with a sharp, explosive crack that echoed like a gunshot across the tense, silent courtroom. His face was dark with righteous judicial fury. "Sit down immediately, Mr. Kendrick," the judge roared, his voice booming with undisputed, absolute authority. "By your own greedy design, and by your own arrogant signature on the amended settlement agreement submitted to this honorable court last week, you explicitly, formally, and irrevocably waived your right to any of her current or future inheritances. You signed a legally binding contract willingly surrendering all claims to her independent, separate assets because you were desperately trying to protect the $2 million you illegally stole from your own marriage. You get absolutely nothing from her massive estate. You get $0 and 0 cents. Not today, not tomorrow, and not ever again in this lifetime." Kendrick fell heavily back against the hard wooden backrest of his chair, completely, utterly, and totally broken. His dark, arrogant eyes glazed over, staring blankly at the high-paneled ceiling as his entire world, his wealth, his pristine reputation, and his bright future violently collapsed around him forever. The judge did not stop there. He leaned forward, adjusting his glasses, his gaze fixed fiercely on the ruined man sitting in the witness stand. "Furthermore," the judge continued, his voice cutting through the thick, heavy air like a razor blade, "based on the undeniable, authenticated evidence of severe financial fraud, corporate embezzlement, and malicious perjury presented today, I am hereby granting the respondent Naomi full primary physical and legal custody of both minor children effective immediately." A massive wave of pure electric relief washed over my entire body. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, thanking my grandfather Elijah for the incredible armor he had provided me from beyond the grave. The judge was still speaking, his tone growing even more severe. "I am also denying your request for unsupervised visitation, Mr. Kendrick," the judge stated firmly. "Given your demonstrated history of financial abuse and emotional manipulation, you will be granted only strictly supervised visitation rights, and you will be responsible for bearing the entire cost of the court-appointed supervision." The judge paused, shuffling the thick stack of banking documents Roxanne had submitted, proving the existence of the offshore Cayman Islands account. "And regarding these illegal offshore wire transfers," the judge announced, looking directly at Kendrick and his pale, sweating defense attorney, "I am immediately freezing all of your personal and corporate assets." I am also formally forwarding this entire case file, including the certified financial statements and the transcripts of your perjured testimony today, directly to the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Your actions constitute severe tax evasion and federal corporate embezzlement. You will be held fully accountable to the absolute highest extent of the law. The moment the judge uttered the three terrifying letters FBI, a sudden frantic movement erupted in the very front row of the viewing gallery. Jasmine, the 24-year-old mistress, who thought she had successfully secured a wealthy, powerful man, realized she was actually named as the primary account holder on a $2 million illegal federal fraud scheme. She jumped out of her wooden seat, her face twisted in pure, unadulterated panic. Without saying a single word to Kendrick, without even looking back at the man she claimed to love, she hiked up her tight white designer dress and literally ran sprinting out of the heavy courtroom doors as fast as her red-bottom heels could carry her. She abandoned him instantly, completely prioritizing her own physical freedom over his shattered, fragile ego. The judge slammed his gavel one final time, officially concluding the brutal, devastating hearing. Court is adjourned. The bailiff instructed everyone to rise as the judge swept out of the room, leaving behind a wake of absolute total destruction for my cruel, abusive in-laws. I stood up from the respondent table feeling incredibly light, incredibly powerful, and finally completely free. Roxanne smiled warmly, her dark eyes shining with professional satisfaction as she snapped her sleek leather briefcase shut. "We did exactly what we came here to do," Naomi Roxanne said, her voice steady and proud. "We absolutely crushed him." I walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, feeling the heavy, terrified stares of Brenda and Brittany following my every single step. Brenda was still clutching Terrence, her breathing shallow and ragged, completely unable to comprehend the massive fortune she had just permanently alienated. Brittany was kneeling on the floor, frantically gathering the spilled cosmetics from her dropped Birkin bag, her face flushed with deep, undeniable humiliation. They had spent years treating me like an inferior peasant, and now they had to watch me walk away as a near-billionaire. I stepped out of the heavy courthouse doors into the bright, warm Atlanta afternoon sunlight, taking a deep, cleansing breath of fresh, free air. The towering glass skyscrapers of downtown Atlanta gleamed beautifully in the distance. Before I could reach the bottom of the wide concrete steps, I heard a desperate, frantic voice calling my name. I stopped and turned slowly, watching Kendrick stumbling out of the courthouse doors, his custom-tailored suit wrinkled and his tie askew. He looked completely unhinged, his arrogant swagger entirely replaced by pure, pathetic desperation. "Naomi, wait please," Kendrick begged, falling to his knees on the hard concrete steps right in front of me. He reached out, grasping desperately at the hem of my dark charcoal pantsuit. "Please, you cannot do this to me. I will go to federal prison. They are going to take everything I have ever built. I always loved you, Naomi. I was just stressed. I was just confused. We can fix this. We can share the money and build an incredible empire together. Just please call your lawyers off. Tell the judge it was a misunderstanding, please, Naomi." I looked down at the man who had shoved our son onto the hard brick driveway. I looked at the man who had tried to leave me homeless and starving, who had mocked me in a cheap diner, and who had tried to steal my children using his stolen wealth. I felt absolutely no pity, no sadness, and no regret. I slowly reached up and adjusted my dark designer sunglasses, shielding my eyes from the bright afternoon glare. I gently but firmly pulled the fabric of my suit out of his trembling, desperate grasp. "I would offer to pay for your ride home, Kendrick," I said, my voice smooth, cold, and utterly devoid of mercy. "But like you said, I am just a washed-up copywriter who smells like cheap laundry detergent." I looked down at him, offering one final lethal smile. "Call an Uber, Kendrick." I turned my back on him completely and walked gracefully down the concrete steps toward the massive black custom-tinted Escalade waiting for me at the curb. I climbed into the plush leather interior, leaving my ruined ex-husband sobbing pathetically on the courthouse steps for the entire city to see. Fast forward 6 months. The absolute undeniable power of karma had swept through Atlanta high society, leaving nothing but total devastation for the people who had tried to destroy me. Kendrick was indicted on multiple federal charges, including massive tax evasion, corporate embezzlement, and severe wire fraud. His prestigious investment bank fired him immediately, distancing themselves completely from his highly publicized legal nightmare. His assets remained frozen, leaving him completely unable to afford the expensive, high-powered defense attorneys he desperately needed. He was currently awaiting federal trial, facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. Jasmine, facing her own severe legal consequences for the offshore accounts, quickly turned state's evidence testifying against Kendrick in exchange for full total legal immunity. The financial collapse of Kendrick completely decimated the rest of his greedy, toxic family. Brenda, who relied entirely on his stolen wealth to fund her lavish country club lifestyle, was forced to sell the Buckhead mansion at a massive loss, just to cover her mounting legal and living expenses. She moved into a tiny, modest apartment on the outskirts of the city, completely shunned and ostracized by her former wealthy elite social circle. But the most poetic justice belonged to Brittany, my cruel, racist sister-in-law. The exact second the family money completely dried up, Brittany showed her true calculating colors. She immediately filed for a brutal, aggressive divorce from Terrence, realizing he could no longer provide the luxurious, privileged lifestyle she demanded. She ruthlessly took half of what little money the family had left, proving once and for all that her loyalty was never to the family, but only to their dwindling bank accounts. As for me, I took the massive, incredible $91.6 million blessing my grandfather Elijah had provided, and I built a completely beautiful, entirely new life. I purchased a stunning, sprawling private estate in a highly secure gated community, ensuring Jamal and Kira had all the space, safety, and peace they truly deserved. But I did not just keep the wealth for myself. I remembered the years I spent feeling small, voiceless, and financially trapped by a cruel, abusive man. I wanted to make absolutely certain that other women had the resources and the power to break free from their own toxic situations. I used a significant portion of my inheritance to establish a massive philanthropic organization right in the heart of the city. The final scene of my incredible journey took place on a bright, beautiful, sunny Tuesday morning in downtown Atlanta. I stepped out of my chauffeur-driven vehicle wearing a flawless, pristine white power suit that radiated absolute, undeniable confidence and immense generational wealth. I walked up to the entrance of a beautifully renovated modern glass building, surrounded by local news reporters, city officials, and community leaders. Jamal and Kira stood proudly right beside me, their faces glowing with immense happiness and deep, profound pride. Jamal had grown taller, his shoulders broad and strong, no longer carrying the heavy weight of his father and his toxic expectations. Kira smiled brightly, holding a pair of large ceremonial golden scissors. Together we stepped up to the wide red ribbon stretched across the double glass doors of the massive facility. I looked up at the polished silver letters gleaming above the entrance, the Elijah Foundation. It was a multi-million-dollar incubator and financial grant center, specifically designed to provide massive funding, legal resources, and business mentorship for Black women entrepreneurs. I had created a sanctuary of empowerment, ensuring that women who were told they were nothing could build their own massive, incredible empires. I took the golden scissors from Kira and cut the thick red ribbon, the crowd erupting into loud, joyful applause. I looked up at the clear blue sky, smiling softly, feeling a deep, profound connection to the grandfather who had saved my life from beyond the grave. I did not just get revenge against the family who tried to break me. I secured my children and their future, I honored my family legacy, and I took my rightful permanent place on the absolute highest throne. The ultimate lesson from Naomi and her journey is that your true worth is never defined by those who try to break you down. When toxic family members or partners attempt to trap you in their own false narratives, you must find the inner strength to walk away. You can always build a new life based on absolute authenticity and mutual respect. True power comes from setting firm boundaries and completely protecting your own future. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our new channel to hear more incredible stories about surviving betrayal and finding your ultimate freedom forever.